Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Afrofuturismo en la UdeA. I'm even brought to you by the African Universidad Mayo y más allá, with the support of the Movimiento de Artes Especulativas Afrocolombiano, the Universidad de Antioquia, Negro Fest 2023, the Afro, the Roots Project, UdeA, and Afrofuturismo. Today, we have the joy of having the presence of some of the most celebrated voices of the Black speculative arts movement at our university. To talk to us about Afrofuturism and their creations around it. We welcome Reynaldo, Christina, Lonnie, Dedren, and Philip to Colombia. We welcome you as well to the University of Antioquia. Welcome to the Negro Fest 2023. We are very delighted to have you here, and we thank you in advance for the wonderful evening that we are going to share. Let us give them a big round of applause. Before we introduce our guest, I would like to invite you to participate in Eurofest 2023. This festival will take place in the city during this holiday weekend. You can find all the other activities in the social media platform. And now, I invite Fredy Mena to take this microphone. He's the leader and founder of the Movimiento de Artes Especulativas Afro-Colombiano, one of the main organizers of this event, and the local voice moving by conversation. Okay? To everyone, once again, thank you.
So, thank you to everybody for being here. Gracias a cada uno de ustedes por estar acá. And I'm Fredy Mena, software developer, and have more than 11 years working with web platforms and video games here in Colombia, Medellin, and Chocó. Okay. Today, I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce to you with our great invitados. Between them, Reynaldo Anderson, which will be the first doing a talk about Afrofuturism and the intersection with Afrocentricity and more topics. So, let me introduce to Reynaldo Anderson. Welcome, Reynaldo. What? Reynaldo Anderson is a professor from the University of Temple, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is executive director, and co-founder of the Black Speculative Art Movement from the United States, BSAM. And she has been creating a lot of content about Afrofuturism, and also is the author of the book Afrofuturism 2.0, and which is a great framework from all the people that want to learn about Afrofuturism, how it works, and their intersection that it has. And also, Reynaldo has been participating in the publications of another books, as for example, The Rite of Astral Blackness, Cosmic Underground, a grimoire of Black speculative dominate this content. Yeah. Yeah, I trying to do my best with the pronunciation. Another of the books which he has been working has to be with the Black Life, Black Politicals, and Black Futures edition special of the. Sorry for the. The other of the books is When Wakanda. I'm gonna say that in Spanish because it is in Spanish. I'm translating at the same time. Sorry for that. ¿Cuándo es Wakanda? Afrofuturismo y Oscuro Futuro Especulativo, Journal of Futures Studies. So I just want that Reynaldo continue and start with his presentation. Everybody, please give a warm welcome to Reynaldo. Thank you.
throughout the that today. uh, Overview. We will see how it's while we presentation. Very excited to hear their presentation. I chose this title because I recently became aware of the concept of the creative people. It's important to talk to them. A lot of scholarship about African life in South America. That study. So a lot of colleagues are waiting about African life in South America. Even though we were here today, I believe the food was on Chicharron. In Mississippi, we would just call that cracker. Same food, different language, but we use the same stuff. So I think the only thing we did not have that access to is black men. Same food. Afrofuturism is how African people locate themselves in space with ages. Technically, we pronounce Afrofuturism, and it's based upon concept that developing people have been in conversation more recently popularized more people familiar with it because of the movie Black Panther and interest that it was generated around the world. It also operates from a particular geography and region. We understand that people have to we are ethical and reasonable to expect people in the to be inspired by where their ancestors came from. And that is translated in different areas like art, music, politics, science, and so forth. It is built so it is a really foundation by being linked to the concept of Afrofuturism. It's possibly be developed by African and others to give it a thoroughly philosophical grasp. So, careful. Talked about this in chapter 3. In this book of African concept of history, where he talks about as a futurology, speculate and gain beyond the next step is to create in sharp contrast and concept. I wish to trace the events of the past, through history and action, present, and plot the plans of the future and possible outcomes. all of this is for simultaneously all by our parents, and one of the things I told my wife, my mother, it's a good mother raising the children, because of the ideas and how full of the spirit into the child. The West African concept that are familiar. So those West African philosophy, to go back and get something of value and bring it forward. So this is how the diaspora specifically linked to the continent of culture. Whether it be at Colombia, America, Brazil, make memory of our ancestors, bring that value that the way it looks like now, that we saw, facilities like 2.0, combined simplicity, it deals with agency, location, or dislocation. With agency, location, and dislocation. And also the African-centered geography of reason. And also the concept 2.0 that we were talking about, Afrofuturism now, African transnational movement, informed by aspects of platform capitalism. What do I mean by platform capitalism? During the pandemic, a lot of our work moved on to platforms like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, where we had to work from home. So that file sharing and all of the other work that we were engaged in for many people, but it was also a sign of privilege for some people to be able to do it. So therefore, we saw the gap, material gap between people who were the haves and the have-nots. People who were not as fortunate to have health care. It also deals with the existential threats facing people of African descent. North America, now the United States government has said that right to slavery is now an existential threat to the security of the United States. I was studying about Colombia here, the right wing military units are the same type of people, that try to overthrow our government on January 6th. The same type of people that try to protest the Brazilian election and Bolsonaro lost. And so the right wing nationalistic movement is a global phenomenon. So there's an international fascist people who believe in democracy, that moderate alternative for that needs to be there. So you could say the Afro people who are opposition to that, who are art, politics, it's characterized by 5 dimensions. Dimension number 1, metaphysics. An ontology of meaning of existence, relations between ontological or true functional aspects of knowledge. Cosmogony, origin of the universe. For example, many of our African ancestors or the indigenous people have different interpretations of where the universe originated. So many people were dislocated from their concept of what how the universe came to be. Many African traditional religions. However, we see many of those residuals culturally survive here in this part of the world. And it's even stronger in this part of the world than it is here. Because most people in North America do not know, more Africans were brought to South America than North America. Even one of our previous presidents was surprised when he saw how many African people there were. He was totally unaware of it. One of the officials had to tell him that the bill was not African. Because in our TV shows in the North, and novellas, we think everybody is white. If you were to see anybody black, then you would see that too. Recently, that we found that many countries in South America have vice presidents who are African descent, or presidents before they were even independent. UdeA, well, in its founding had a perfect African descent. Other leaders around region. And I remember I had a good time studying the history of the country called Argue and incorporate video, audio, and sound. Art and music are important to the history of Africa. Many of you are aware of the music aspect of it. It was popular. Many people became aware of what it looked like. It became somewhat really controversial in the depth. The director of Google chose to show the indigenous people, the representatives. I think that upset a lot of people. Terms of a lot of people enjoyed the other things to think about. One of your authors in the topic is wrote a relationship.com. Really lays in the thing about. Yes. We're trying to get more of the work in English because we've only become aware of it now because so much of the work is in Spanish. But then Palabreo should be regarded the same way people regard Pablo Neruda. However, we learn about Pablo Neruda, but not Palabreo. Next to the organization, we have a African American physicist who discovered how to use a beam percentage in the way to look at physics. Yeah. Right there on a physics magazine. These are in the nature of reality. The people are going back and rediscovering, reconnecting, and so forth. To retrieve that which is of value, bring it to the present. Also in biology, astronomy, architecture, medicine. When I'm probably the last generation of my community that remembers when that many of the healers were African American women. Because they were in charge of delivering the babies, because a couple of generations ago we were not allowed to go to the white people's hospital. So the women would have natural herbal healing elements that they would use in the community to help people recover from illnesses. The fourth dimension, social science. In the picture there in the middle, you can recognize that as Alonzo Nelson. She is one of the important key figures in the emergence of Afrofuturismo. She also now works for the Biden administration in the science department. So I recently for an exhibition that we had in Washington, D.C. The work of Sheikh Diálogo, famous scholar, really science, technology, things whose foundational to what we call African American. And of course, the political ideas of farming directly lead to the movement. And as we recently said in the last decade, all people of African descent is a consistent belong to the African community.
Africa is reclaiming its food that we take because they realize that food that we're developing. Africa, this certainly is population shift that happens in the world. Answer number 5, programmatic. Negro. Example of thinking and planning about the future when you're working together, education, culture, technology, aesthetics, to promote a vision, high value city. I saw on the way traveling here. That's what they did. Any area that we're actually very, very political. So actually, everywhere around the world. He said, the tax regular parts is a vehicle to promote all of these ideas. So the Fredy Mena, our local coordinator here in Colombia, we have organized in Brazil, South Africa, Senegal, Angola, Germany, North America, count. Spread out the world to promote practice. You see there on the screen, or when we were in Johannesburg, South Africa a few years ago. Around the table, we're dealing with young South African artists, dealing with the techniques, same that we were in. And so we are building things all around the world now. You don't have to just wait on a movie, it's going on every day. Basically, Hollywood is caught up to the work we've been doing. And that is why when the movie Black Panther came out, I remember telling somebody, oh, they're going to be rich. They were shocked and something that people around the world saw. The people have been doing this for the long term. Now, getting to the building to the where we're from. 4 pillars. I want to talk about the concept of this maybe boys are how technology accelerate moving things forward and back. That's what I theorem that was posited in the 1960s. Because of the transition in technology, knowledge doubled. I believe now, because of the emergence of AI, it's probably faster than that. Many of you heard about the ChatGPT AI app. That's shifted at least 3 times since last November. It's driving professionals crazy now. Because young people can go to the ChatGPT or the AI to do their paper. However, you can kind of distinguish an AI paper from a paper that's well done. The AI still is not good enough to get a college paper passed the professor who actually reads the paper. You know that they will come one of the interesting things that we did exploring in my class this spring, given semester with my graduate, right here. We asked the AI, how can you defeat white supremacy? And the AI gave us a solution. And they were shocked. They said, if you do these four things, you can do this, this, and this. And I was like, oh, and they were like, oh my gosh. The AI was teaching them how to come up with a plan. And so students were like, oh, they crafted it. Foresight, which you'll hear some of that when Dr. Lonnie Brooks talks, which is what some of the professional futures people do. Foresight, seeing where things are headed. Like, for example, when we were talking about some of my friends who are unaware of that, there was a trade agreement done between North America and Colombia. That's why they say Colombia is very well positioned to benefit and do quite well in the century because of the trade. Now, along with Mexico, Canada, and North America, I believe, it was under, and that was probably the only smart thing done in one business. Colombia. And because Colombia is from the Pacific and the Atlantic, but that be why people are bothering black people who are on the Pacific. There's so much trade is going to be you can go Pacific, it's not going to be people off there. Pacific, what they call it. Insight, understand why things are happening. All across the world now, right wing people are politicized. So what's really happening is white men are angry that white men are angry. Black and brown people are angry. That's the whole spreading across the world. They're very angry now, so they're trying to use the Bible, saying God is against you, you have control of the Bible. So cover that up, they're trying to use the Bible, but the real thing is what they call on Fox News replacement theory. These are the replacement theories. We don't want to be replaced by what the God is. So it incites violence. Minorities, and the recent Atlantic Monthly article that just came out this week that said that white supremacy too, because people have been shocked that one of the recent violence is people who are white, and I think they finally figured it out that these people that want to do the killing, these are the descendants of the conquistadors. These are the descendants of the children. North America, they killed Indians, and South America, they killed Indians. So Americans are finally figuring out that they're disaggregating what is happening to nations. 20% of all the people on the Catholic side neo-Nazi side. We can feel protected there. Now that's the middle of looking at what this means because they were surprised they never thought it was. So the other thing is shifting the politics perspective. That it's reducing violence. Oversight. GPS, connecting everything to everything. Because of the war in Ukraine, some people will not be able to get much food over the year. There's the fertilizer, rain, and people come out of that region will stop coming. I believe Brazil was heavily dependent on chemicals for their agriculture in that region. So that means that the Brazilians have to figure out how to create necessary products for their agriculture to replace that with good, or to raise the land. And probably I can simply say most people of African descent are on neither side. The war has nothing to do with them. And so they're trying to get the people from the African world to take side. In the land war that's going on right now. So now, for the first time since last year, you look it up and you do the research in UdeA in March, several weeks ago. Members of the International Governing Elites, Council of Foreign Relations, and they said that 2023 is year one. The New World Order started this year. It was proclaimed in New Delhi, India, several weeks ago. And what they mean by that, the world order that was shaped between 1945 until recently is going away. And that is why you see different relationships merge now around certain types of trade agreements. China has made Iran and Saudi Arabia, they don't not be against each other anymore. So we are a new world order, effective this year. 2023 is year one, whatever this world is going to be. What I'm saying that most of the work that was done in Afrofuturism was done with the old world order. So anybody that does Afrofuturism that more than a couple of years, you can reevaluate what they can do. That is, you're going to have to rearticulate Afrofuturism in the context of what's really happened in the last few years. What has happened in the previous 2 years now, you have to interrogate it because more and more what I'm seeing around the world, like people can no longer say that Afrofuturism is a North American phenomenon. At my version of fact, I'm here in this festival. Increasingly, people of African descent from South America are going to define what it is. Because they are more of them. And they're going to have to answer their comments even more to listen to what they have to say. Okay, so that means we cannot have, so that means that next, if we have a cookout, there's got to be some chicharron. And some other, along with the fried chicken and some other stuff. So in a multipolar world, this is going to look different depending on which region that you're doing it. Here's an example. Afrofuturismo, I was totally surprised when I heard the way Afrofuturismo is practiced in French-speaking West Africa with the Muslim population. They are combining Afrofuturism with their culture to be against extremism and from French domination. So that is how they're looking at Afrofuturism, Senegal, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon. So they're using it as a way to reconfigure French-speaking culture of Africa. And now we're gonna wait and see what's gonna come out of South America in terms of how they use it to empower themselves to think about the future. The concept of the metaverse versus the pure. The metaverse, of course, was a concept that came from a book called Snow Crash in the early 90s. When you read it, I don't think it's necessarily applicable to what how we think of it now. Now we talk about the pluriverse. That is where a much more democratic way of thinking about how we operate in virtual reality. Just 2 weeks ago, for example, I participated in a metaverse activity with Afro-Brazil, where I used technology to transcribe a speech into Portuguese and take my comment in Portuguese and upload it into virtual space. I then adopted an avatar to interact with the Afro-Brazilians in the metaverse, and everybody was able to communicate with each other. So it was not a one-way dialogue where they were hearing talking English. We had a setup where we communicated in Portuguese and English. So that is an example of what we call the pluriverse. These are the challenges that are in front of us right now. Digitization, or what some people call the singularity. Some people are even talking about using intelligence amplifiers to put on children to help them learn which I don't know if that's necessarily a good solution, at least in North America there. Nanotech is right around the corner with quantum computing. The biotech revolution is right here on top of us. The supernet and AI is here. Climate change and resource depletion and environmental crisis. And then neo-fascism and terrorism that is going on all around the world at the present time. For example, in North America, you may have heard of a politician called Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, she is from Georgia, and they are talking about, they are literally romanticizing the Civil War in American history. And there's talk of the Civil War. However, I don't think that many people are necessarily worried about it as much. I know my ancestors were very happy the South was when they fought for the Union Army and burned the South to the ground. Okay, and when they freed 200,000 African men and fought for the Union Army. So these are very tense times that we're living in, where many people are afraid, and they are resorting to neo-fascist violence to suppress democracy. Lessons for the nuevo mundo. Now, when I was in college, that's when I remember Colombia changed its constitution to recognize the rights of its Afro-Colombian population, and there still have been problems in the Pacific region. Then, before I got my doctorate, the Afro-Colombians that were killed in the town of, I believe it's pronounced Bahia, in 2002, and it's manifesting a continuation of the global color line. No matter where you are in the world, whether you are north or south, in the world right now, people of African descent are facing serious mistreatment from things that people had thought had gone away. They had returned a couple of generations later with a vengeance. The growing neo-fascist movement among white people in the global north and south, with Trump and Bolsonaro. I think, what do we call in North America, Bolsonaro or Donald Trump on steroids? In terms of how he treats people. And violent extremism. And so people are going to have to be prepared to stand up and fight for democracy over the next couple of years. This is going to be a tense thing. In North America next year, we may have two 80-year-old men running for the presidency, but we gotta hope that the president we have now, his heart doesn't give out before we vote. So we can stop Trump from coming back. Okay, so I will stop right there and take any questions you may have at this time. And definitely welcome to the next presenter to come up and present their information. And thank you very much. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Drea. I'm Colombian American. I'm excited to be out here. Welcome. I wanted to ask if Afrofuturism, is it considered a Black political ideology in the same way that Black nationalism or Pan-Africanism? Like, is there, or is it more so a social type movement?
I would say right now it's probably cultural. That's what I would say, the primarily cultural. Because some people think about it like this. When I say operating from a geography of reason, there are people, for example, who are not of African descent, but are very good scholars in Afrofuturism, who are, we would consider allies, because they care about the work. So we're not a racial separatist, we realize If you're gonna do Afrofuturism, do it from the perspective of African people to do it with. And so, well, for some people, it's very political when you start having an alternative imagination to the what the government is giving. Okay, so it could be considered political. Because the first thing that we talk about is decolonize people's imagination. They're going to build a society that what somebody else did. And that is why our primary thing when we got started was our biggest supporters were single mothers. Single mothers would come to our event and look at our comic books and our art because it helped keep their kids interested in school. There's a little when you get mothers involved supporting something, that's kind of hard to stop. And also, I would say in its entirety, the majority of the leadership in the Afrofuturism movement, like this one, from the African descent. You know, some of them are engaged in science and technology, like the digital sciences. Others are in visual arts. Others are educators. Others, some people are philosophers. However, as a movement, several years old, is still developing. So we don't know what it's going to become, but it is definitely tied into the concept of the Pan-African transformational African communities in terms of how it moves its imagination.
Hola a todos, me llamo Cristina, soy afromexicana o black chicana y haré mi mejor esfuerzo para dar mi presentación en español. Muchas gracias por recibirme hoy. Entonces, hacia un transhumanismo afrilógico, esoterismo africano como JED para un proyecto de transhumanismo. Pero, ¿qué es JED? JED es la antigua palabra egipcia que significa un lugar fuerte para pararse o estabilidad, según lo definido por Molefique Asante en un afrocéntrico hacia un renacimiento africano. África ha producido una profunda y antigua tradición de pensamiento esotérico, pero la palabra esotérico se deriva de las palabras griegas, esotéricos, que significa pertenecer a un círculo interno, y esotero, que significa ir más adentro. Cuando se habla de esoterismo, la palabra a menudo se toma como sinónimo de esoterismo occidental, lo que denota una tradición de misterio occidental. Y la opinión común es que el esoterismo es una invención occidental que comienza con los griegos en el siglo BC. Pero esta es una noción eurocéntrica que considera la tradición esotérica africana como un fenómeno primitivo, supersticioso y malicioso, mientras que considera la tradición esotérica occidental como una disciplina de mente elevada que está reservada para unos pocos iniciados especiales que tienen la capacidad intelectual para lidiar con verdades profundas con el propósito de lograr elevación o iluminación. En verdad, África tiene su propia tradición esotérica agregada en las filosofías y prácticas tradicionales africanas, que se remonta a la antigua Kemet, incluso más atrás en el pasado africano, en el que Kemet tiene su génesis. Abarca la metafísica, la espiritualidad, la ética, el misticismo, las ciencias naturales y la filosofía, y se basa en la noción de que los seres humanos poseen una chispa divina latente que es el catalizador de la trascendencia. Lo siento. física, cognitiva y espiritual. Es importante señalar aquí que la tradición esotérica de los pueblos africanos ha sido enturbiada por el Ma'afa y la parodia de la historia eurocéntrica, que ha transformado nuestras formas de conocimientos, ser y relacionarnos unos con otros y con el universo. Como tal, es imperativo que los africanos recuperemos nuestra tradición esotérica y la comprometamos con la misma seriedad y dedicación que nuestros antiguos antepasados queméticos. La sabiduría espiritual y práctica puede servir como jet para un proyecto de transhumanismo africéntrico contemporáneo. El desarrollo del transhumanismo. El término transhumanismo fue acuñado por primera vez en un sentido contemporáneo por el eugenista y biólogo evolutivo Julian Sorel Huxley en el 1957, cuando escribió: la especie humana puede, si lo desea, trascenderse a sí misma, no solo esporádicamente, un individuo aquí y en una manera y un individuo allá en otra manera, pero en su totalidad como humanidad. Necesitamos un nombre para esta nueva creencia, quizás transhumanismo, con servicio. El hombre sigue siendo hombre, pero trascendiéndose a sí mismo, realizando nuevas posibilidades de y para su naturaleza humana. Desde entonces se ha convertido en un movimiento filosófico que considera al ser humano como excepcional y apoya el uso de la tecnología para la mejora humana. Muchos años después de que Huxley popularizara por primera vez el término transhumanismo, el filósofo Max More escribió en un ensayo titulado Transhumanismo hacia una filosofía futurista, en el que define el transhumanismo como una clase de filosofías de la vida que buscan la continuación y aceleración de la evolución de vida inteligente más allá de su forma humana actual y las limitaciones humanas por medio de la ciencia y la tecnología. Así, la noción básica del transhumanismo es que los seres humanos, debido a nuestras excepcionales habilidades cognitivas e inventivas que nos diferencian del resto del mundo natural, no estamos limitados por la evolución natural de la especie, sino que tenemos la capacidad de guiar nuestra propia destino mediante la creación de mejoras físicas e intelectuales con el uso de la tecnología. Por lo tanto, la noción básica del transhumanismo es que los seres humanos, debido a nuestras excepcionales habilidades cognitivas e inventas que nos diferencian del resto del mundo. El transhumanismo es parte de un movimiento posthumano, intelectual, social y cultural más amplio que ha desafiado la definición de humano, la naturaleza de la humanidad y lo que significa ser humano en el centro del humanismo contemporáneo y las formaciones políticas. El humanismo tomó forma como ideológica, social y tradición intelectual desde principios del siglo XVIII. Los principios centrales de esta ideología afirman que los humanos son especie excepcional, separada y distinta de otros segmentos de la naturaleza, lo que es evidente por una dotación de razón y la capacidad de simbolismo, pensamiento, imaginaciones multiplicadas, abiertas, la formación de redes sociales complejas y la autoconciencia. Poco antes del surgimiento del humanismo, las mutaciones epistemológicas específicas tomaron forma y se impusieron como paradigmas esenciales en el siglo XVIII. Estas fueron las disciplinas de etnografía y antropología, que buscaron crear el otro y categorizar los sistemas de conocimiento indígenas, los humanos y las culturas con eurocentrismo como métrica para la comparación y categorización. V. Mudimbe aclara que a partir de este punto, varias escuelas de antropología desarrollaron modelos y técnicas para describir lo primito, de acuerdo con las tendencias cambiantes en el marco de la experiencia occidental. Como resultado, las culturas, los sistemas de conocimiento y las formas de ser africanos se clasificaron como primitivos y subalternos a los urepos. Los africanos fueron reducidos a objetos de estudio en lugar de co-creadores de la producción de conocimiento y participantes activos en el desarrollo de epistemologías. Al mismo tiempo, el siglo XVIII vio una expansión colonial europea sustancial que fue impulsada y sancionada por la categorización antropológica de los africanos y otros pueblos indígenas. Como señala Mudimbe, las teorías de la expansión colonial y los discursos sobre la primitividad africana enfatizan una historicidad y la promoción de un cierto modelo de historia. Finalmente, el siglo XVIII también vio el surgimiento de la ilustración europea, que se caracterizó por la observación empírica, la razón y la ciencia consideradas las únicas fuentes legítimas de conocimiento, por lo que la ilustración definió las características del salvajismo. Así, los proyectos de humanismo y transhumanismo se han desarrollado dentro de un marco eurocéntrico, apoyado por epistemologías eurocéntricas en las que la discusión sobre la naturaleza de los seres humanos y la humanidad necesariamente niega la de y por lo tanto excluye los pueblos africanos y no europeos. Después de la bendición tecnología del siglo XXI que marcó el comienzo de la aceleración inexorable y exponencial de los avances en los campos de biotecnología, las ciencias cognitivas, la nanotecnología, la inteligencia artificial y la ingeniera genética. El proyecto transhumanista se ha convertido en una realidad que se extiende a la naturaleza misma. El transhumanismo ha crecido en alcance, atractivo y poder al ritmo del aumento de ultrabillones con los recursos y el interés para invertir en tales proyectos, sectores biotecnológicos y Silicon Valley. En su libro Citizen Cyborg, el sociólogo y bioteco James Hughes expone la visión transhumanista de la siguiente manera. En el siglo XXI, la convergencia de la inteligencia artificial, la nanotecnología y la ingeniería genética permitirá a los humanos lograr cosas mucho más allá de un siglo. Nuestros sentidos y cognición serán mejorados. Ganaremos control sobre nuestras emociones y memoria. Nos fusionaremos con máquinas y las máquinas se parecen más a los humanos. Estas tecnologías nos permitan evolucionar hacia veridades posthumanas y nos llevaran a una era sociedad transhumana. Cualquiera con alguna previsión puede ver que esto plantea una miriada de preocupaciones éticas sobre la trayectoria del proyecto transhumanista. ¿Quién se beneficiará? ¿A expensas de quién? ¿Quién es digno de mejorar? ¿Y quién será utilizado y descartado para ese propósito? Hoy en día, este es una organización sin fines de lucro que aboga por el uso ético de la tecnología y la ciencia para la misión transhumanista de mejorar la especie humana. En su declaración transhumanista, que fue redactada por un grupo de colaboradores internacionales en 1998, afirman que la humanidad está ahora en el punto en el tiempo donde capacidad de superar deficiencias cognitivas, sufrimiento involuntario y nuestro confinamiento al planeta Tierra. Además, argumentan que para que el proyecto transhumanista sea ético, los responsabilidades políticos deben emplear una visión inclusiva y moral al evaluar los riesgos y beneficios de las nuevas tecnologías. Si bien la conversación contemporánea sobre el avance de un proyecto transhumanista involucra cuestiones de ética e inclusión, todavía está muy lejos de comprender que la humanidad tiene su origen en África y emplea una visión humanista afrocéntrica que centra la conciencia epistemológica y la ética africanas. Al mismo tiempo que el panorama tecnológico se expande rápidamente, el pueblo africano y el propio continente africano continúan siendo explotados por estos mismos avances tecnológicos que pretenden ser la gracia salvador de toda la humanidad. Un bien ejemplo de esto es la esclavitud moderna que alimenta las minas de cobalto en la República Democrática del Congo, que alimentan las industrias de teléfonos inteligentes, automóviles eléctricos e informáticas. Por lo tanto, la aplicación del pensamiento esotérico africano al transhumanismo sirve para crear enfoque más viable para mejoramiento humano de los africanos, que abordan no solo los aspectos físicos y mentales del desarrollo humano, sino también las dimensiones culturales y espirituales. África se ha preocupado por las ideas humanistas y transhumanistas desde el antiguo mundo África. Para los propósitos de esta discusión, la atención se centra en el antiguo Kemet y sus concepciones que proporcionan trascendencia. Los antiguos egipcios tienen una cosmovisión que involucraba tres clases de seres sintientes. Estos fueron el Neteru, que son aspectos o personalidades de la divinidad; el Ax, que se refiere a los espíritus de aquellos que habían muerto físicamente y habían hecho una transición exitosa a la vida más allá de la palabra física; y los vivos. Los Ax no abandonaron el reino terrenal para existir en algún paraíso celestial, sino que se crea que dormían en sus tumbas por la noche y se despertaban cada mañana para salir a la necrópolis, para vivir la vida ideal sin restricciones para las preocupaciones de la existencia física. Esta es en su misma una idea transhumanista. El ser humano trasciende las limitaciones y luchas de la existencia física es una metáfora del estado trascendente, último alcanzable por los seres humanos, que encarna la noción de la interconexión y la unidad de todo lo que existe en el universo. Como guía para el transhumanismo, el concepto de A proporciona un marco para el propósito de desarrollar y utilizar tecnologías avanzadas que sirvan a la naturaleza interconectada de la existencia. Por lo tanto, la incorporación del antiguo concepto africano de A en la filosofía transhumanista tiene el potencial de ampliar el enfoque del movimiento para involucrar la búsqueda del avance espiritual y la iluminación. Desde una perspectiva cultural africana, lo espiritual y la tecnología no están reñidos, sino que están necesariamente entrelazados. James P. Allen afirma que la palabra neteru en el antiguo idioma egipcio se traduce como Dios, pero Obenga nos dice que los antiguos egipcios mismos entendieron el significado de la palabra como el despertar de la conciencia superior dentro de la esencia primordial, Nuin. Nuin es un aspecto de la divinidad hecho conocible en términos humanos, con el propósito de actuar, hacer, crear, guiar a la humanidad y al mundo entero. Se hace obvio en el sentido de la palabra neteru que se incrustado en el nombre del lenguaje hay una conciencia esotérica que considera el esfuerzo humano para alcanzar la conciencia divina con el propósito de elevar y guiar a la humanidad como central para la existencia y el propósito del lenguaje mismo. Además, el significado también sugiere que es posible que la conciencia humana se eleve al nivel de la conciencia divina. De hecho, el significado de las palabras meju y nature, como se definió anteriormente, sugiere que el propósito del habla, tanto escrita como hablada, es despertar esa conciencia mucho más elevada que ya existe como una potencialidad dentro del ser humano. En la sociedad egipcia antigua, la divinidad se entiende como la totalidad de la creación y lo único que existe, mientras que todo lo demás en el mundo y el cosmos es expresión de un aspecto de esencia divina, incluye la humanidad. Esta realidad es evidente en el lenguaje revelado en Nature. Las palabras para humanidad y humano, cada uno incluye el determinativo que está reservado para los seres divinos y las deidades. Estas ortografías para las palabras humano y humanidad en Nature están tomadas por Obenga de una pieza titulado Los 4 grandes logros de Ra en el tiempo de la creación. En los textos del actuar que datan del Imperio Medio, otra observación semántica y filosófica que Obenga extrae de este texto es lágrimas. Como se imagina el mito, las lágrimas representan el pensamiento, la reflexión. Los seres humanos se supone son parte del cuerpo del demiurgo. En otras palabras, al menos en lo que respecta a este texto, los humanos son divinidades. De hecho, la palabra para humanidad, remet, tiene determinante, estrictamente hablando, un determinativo que simboliza una deidad. Por lo tanto, podemos ver registrada en el lenguaje la noción de que la divinidad y la humanidad están inextricablemente vinculadas. De hecho, este último es una extensión o aspecto del primero, y el lenguaje es una herramienta para que la humanidad exprese el aspecto superior que ha traído a la humanidad a la existencia. El transhumanismo abordado desde esta perspectiva esotérica africana tiene el potencial de redefinir los objetivos del proyecto, alejándolo de la noción de crear una sociedad poshumana a una en la que los humanos hayan alcanzado su forma más alta, que siempre ha sido una potencialidad latente, existente dentro del ser humano. Un lugar de una que es ajena al humano. Desde una perspectiva esotérica afrocéntrica, la tecnología es también un aspecto de lo divino, como lo es todo lo que existe en el mundo, que emerge de la conciencia divina del ser humano para cumplir el fin último de la trascendencia. Ma'at es un ideal conceptual altamente polisémico que fue el ideal fundamental de la ética, la cultura, la sociedad del antiguo Egipto. Mudabinge Bingo explica que Ma'at articula tres ideales. El ideal del conocimiento, es decir, el amor a la ciencia, la aspiración al conocimiento y más precisamente el conocimiento del ser verdadero, de lo que es verdadero, seguro, cierto. El ideal moral de la verdad, la justicia y la rectitud, y el ideal metafísico del amor y el conocimiento del ser que está en el principio. Además de ser un ideal moral, un ideal epistemológico o filosófico y un ideal metafísico. Ma'at es también un ideal ecológico en la medida en que el ideal de naturaleza y por lo tanto se relaciona con el futuro o el destino de la humanidad. Como tal, Ma'at es una base ética superlativa para un humanismo transesotérico africano y que proporciona una base para el mejoramiento de la humanidad, sino que tampoco se posiciona en desacuerdo con el mundo mismo en el que los humanos se esfuerzan por prosperar. De hecho, reconoce el mundo y el ser humano mejorado como partes de un todo equilibrado, que cuidara un proyecto de transhumanismo que valora la colaboración con la naturaleza en el desarrollo de tecnologías avanzadas sostenibles, que eliminen en lugar de impulsar la explotación de los humanos y la naturaleza. En conclusión, dado que el movimiento transhumanismo actual se ha desarrollado dentro de las mutaciones epistemológicas eurocéntricas que tuvieron lugar en el siglo XVIII y bajo lo que Charles Mills llama el contrato racial, un acuerdo no escrito que refuerza el sistema global de supremacía blanca y opera como base para la dominación económica, política y social de las personas negras y no blancas por parte de los blancos. Es importante establecer una visión afrocéntrica del transhumanismo, arraigada en una conciencia esotérica africana para el empoderamiento y la preservación de los pueblos africanos y nuestros valores culturales. A medida que nuestro mundo cambia rápidamente con el rápido desarrollo de las tecnologías en las sociedades modernas, el racismo o supremacía blanca global, argumenta Mills, es en sí mismo un sistema político, una estructura de poder particular de gobierno formal o informal, privilegios socioeconómicos y normas para la distribución diferencial de riqueza material y oportunidades, beneficios y cargas, derechos y deberes. La riqueza material, las oportunidades, los beneficios, las cargas, los derechos y los deberes a los que aluden Mills incluyen los riesgos y beneficios de mejoramiento humano bajo el movimiento transhumanista. La noción eurocéntrica del ser humano universal es destructiva y excluyente, que siempre ha sido a expensas del pueblo africano. Por lo tanto, es importante que el pueblo africano permanezca arraigado en nuestras propias nociones esotéricas de ascensión, para que no seamos completamente borrados en el mundo poshumano colonial transhumanista. No tomar la iniciativa a favor de dejar que las construcciones europeas nos guíen siempre ha sido en detrimento para el pueblo africano. No hay realidad en la que supremista blanco global use sus tecnologías para beneficiar a los africanos, de la misma manera que lo hace con los europeos. Muchísimas gracias. Y por favor, ayúdenme con las preguntas para no malinterpretar nada. Eso. ¿No hay preguntas? Ok, gracias.
Me parece tema que trae favoritismo, un poco más adelante.
Gracias.
De hecho, ya hablamos de una clase de cómo África, la África negra,
Ajá.
digamos, tuvo su papel importante en los pies de Egipto, ¿cierto? Y cómo se quiere dibujar esa presencia negra en lo que era género, ¿cierto?
Yeah.
Y yo creo que precisamente eso es lo que tú hablas en estos tiempos, que hay esa controversia. Es importante, sobre todo porque allí hay una clave para nosotros como África entender nuestro pasado y también esa tendencia que tú hablas. Me gustaría ver si tienen un poco sobre ese tema. Ahorita, pues, lo que ha despertado esa controversia es la serie documental de Cleopatra, ¿no? Entonces creo que es importante volver a este tema y sobre todo ponerlo sobre la mesa, no para nosotros, sino para poder entender nuestra raíz.
Gracias. You want to? Yeah. I heard most of it. He said what he likes to do was important at this time when it was controversial. Oh, the question.
Let me do the question for you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do answer Maria.
Oh, yeah, the question.
The question is related with the question is related with Kenya.
Uh-huh.
To the concept of Kenya, how actually there are movements that are trying to raise the black
Yeah.
present in Kenya and Egypt.
Right.
So raising funds, what do you think about it? Because actually Netflix gonna be releasing a series about Cleopatra, who is so controversial.
Right.
A lot of people just try to watch
Uh-huh.
Cleopatra,
Uh-huh.
and skin and everything. So, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so I think what we do about it is exactly what I was talking about or trying to talk about in this presentation, which is to go back and to recoup our esoteric consciousness, our cosmogony, our way of connecting with each other. And I think that a lot of what they do, I think in like these Netflix series, like about Cleopatra, is that they sort of, that's why I called it like a kind of a parody of history or a transmogrification of history, right? Where they're giving us back an altered version of who we are and who they are and who the world is, right? So I think what we do is, a lot of times esotericism is something that African people and Black people, we stay away from because we're told it's evil or it's weird or it's primitive or it doesn't make any sense. But when we start to go back and pull our consciousness, then you can look in Kemet and you can see that that same consciousness is in the Dogon, in civilizations that pre-exist Kemet, right? You can look at the Igbo people who are called Nigerian, and you can see that they have the same sort of cosmovisions and the same sort of esoteric consciousness and ideas about the ox and the spirit and humanity as being part of the divine and nature and all of that stuff. You can look all the way here in, you know, Colombia, in Afro-Mexico, and you can see that we have the same sort of consciousness that links back to Kemet. So I say they can make as many movies where Cleopatra is white, but if we know our own consciousness, then we understand that when we're looking at Kemet and we're looking at the cosmology there, that we're looking at Dogon and Afro-Colombia and Afro-Mexico and the Caribbean, and we know that that's ours, no matter what they try to make it look like. I think that's what we do, yeah.
Okay, great. No sé si era como una pregunta muy boba, pero
No.
como es que me cuesta un poco, ¿no? Pues más bien me cuestiono cómo buscar estas raíces, estas novedosas maneras de ver el mundo, cuando estamos como tan arraigados en estas maneras occidentales. O sea, ¿cómo leer, cómo aprender de todo esto? Porque lo primero que pensamos es un texto, en películas, en documentales que son cosas occidentales, pero no es como la sabiduría de original. Entonces, me pregunto cómo, no sé si es una pregunta muy boba y de verdad se me ha cuestionado cómo o aprender un poquito de eso, si estamos tan arreglados en estos medios occidentales.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's part of like, in the presentation, I say that the Western world translates Neteru to be God. But Obenga tells us that the ancient Egyptians themselves understood it to mean the awakening of divine consciousness within the essence of Nuin, right? So I think you're absolutely right. When we're taking in our own wisdom from through European filters and Western filters, there is a watering down of what's there. So I would say seek out indigenous wisdoms. Look for what indigenous people say, and then you'll start to see the connection. So you do have to shift your worldview, whereas the Western world will tell us that Set or Heru or these people in ancient Kemet were gods. But really, ancient Kemet understands that these are aspects of divinity that are in the world. So Set is not the god of wind. Set is the wind, which is a part of divinity, as are you. So I say my answer to that is, I say read the books, even if they're Western, so that you know what the opposition is saying, because you have to know how to fight your enemy. You have to know what your enemy is saying and what they think, right? But also I say seek out indigenous wisdom. Look to our ancestors and even the people that are still alive today who are telling you about the world. And a lot of things that we find is that they were right. Like when we look in Dogon, they knew about the planet Sirius. They knew how far it was. I mean, ancient African indigenous peoples understood the way that the planets rotate and the earth and things like that long before the Western world could figure it out. So I say go back to indigenous wisdom, and then also be skeptical when you hear translations or iterations or definitions from the Western world of what our things mean. Be curious and question, and I would say push back against that. Yeah. Oh.
Yo, pues, me parece muy importante y quiero dar la pertinencia de una cuestión de espacio.
Gracias.
Como algo crítico por la participación que es cierto, y entiendo también la propuesta de entenderlo del diálogo afrocéntrico, del mundo afrocéntrico, como para mostrar esa Afrofuturismo, ¿verdad? Pero también me causa un poquito de no sé, problema, sí, digamos, un problema, cómo acercarnos también en ese transhumanismo afrocéntrico a las singularidades propias del pueblo africano, ¿cierto? Porque hablamos como el pueblo africano, como algo global, como soy. Pero desde el mismo pueblo africano existen singularidades, incluso en la diáspora, por ejemplo, en Colombia, existen pueblos del Caribe, y sus propias.
Por supuesto.
Entonces, ¿cómo nosotros acercarnos? Y así lo piensan, agarrando eso con mucho cuidado, porque al no hacerlo, pues podemos caer también.
Por supuesto.
En este mismo que no lo entonces, un punto apreciativo que está combinado y una nueva singularidad que se puede. Entonces, yo te preguntaría eso, porque
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I totally understand what you're saying. And I think it's like a concern that a lot of people have where they think maybe it's a misunderstanding about what Afrocentricity is. So Afrocentrism and Afrocentricity are different. So Afrocentricity is not just the inverse of Eurocentrism, right? Afrocentricity recognizes African people as actors and co-creators in their own historical legacy and not subjects, right? And at the same time, it recognizes that humanity originates in Africa. And even on the continent, what you're saying is so true. Not only is the diaspora diverse, but on the continent of Africa, it's diverse. There are many different languages. There's the Igbo people, there's the Dogon, there's Cameroon, there's, many different people with different cultures and different cosmovisions, what you're saying, right? But there is also a common thread throughout Africa, and even here in the diaspora, where I think the central thing about African worldview is that humanity is divinity, is that all humanity is divinity, is a respect for nature and for one another. And so I think that Afrocentricity with a sort of African humanist perspective is important. That's how we apply that to everything. And then when you're doing that, you're respecting the people in Hawaii, you're respecting the Maori, you're respecting the people in Australia, the indigenous people all over the world, and also understanding that we have a common legacy and a common sort of origin. So our cosmovisions might change, but also the one thing that remains the same is that we are all divine and that we respect the natural world and one another, which is very much in contrast to Eurocentrism. Yeah. Oh, he's gonna ask in English. I know. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I would say, how is, and you said that, how do we become augmented in terms of furthering our different developments of race,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned that, as you said in the presentation, I think I think that problem gets solved when we apply an Afrologic, esoteric foundation, like ethical basis to it. I think because our African esoteric consciousness says that we have to protect all people, that we cannot destroy the earth, right? So then we're not committing the same sort of projects like the cobalt mines in the Dominican Republic, where they're using slave labor of African people to power these new technologies that they're making with smart cars and all of that stuff, right? So I think that the way that we approach that is, if we have an African esoteric basis for what we're doing, then we automatically are protecting indigenous peoples, we're respecting indigenous epistemologies, and we're respecting the natural world. I think also, if I had more time, I would love to have done a presentation on all of the technology that Aksum in Egypt and the Dogon had. So when we look at the world from a Western lens, we say they have no technology, but there's no way they could have done any of these things. But when we look at it from an Afrocentric, meaning centering the African perspective, we can see they had technologies, they just didn't destroy the earth for them. Their technologies were not at odds with the natural world or with other humans. And I think that's how we solve that problem. De nada. Muchas gracias.
I'm gonna continue introducing our next talk, or our next guest. Voy a continuar presentando a nuestro siguiente invitado. El siguiente invitado se llama Dedren Snead. Listo, es nuestro siguiente ponente. Es un emerging technologies, creative consultant, and social futurism from Snow Hill, North Carolina. Currently based in Atlanta, Snead is a creative that utilizes graphic novels, video games, and animation along with mobile applications and augmented reality to build inclusive storytelling and equally popular media. Okay. He is also a serial entrepreneur. A serial entrepreneur who has been connected and has been creating gamified learning platforms. Like as, for example, Key 20 students to creative and technical training for future-ready workplace development. He recently accepted an artistic residence position with the Creative Media Industry Institute at Georgia University for the Y22 school year. So that's gonna be our next speaker. Dedren, you are very welcome.
All right, everyone. Okay. All right, so thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time and opportunity to come here and be a part of this fantastic presentation. My name is Dedren Snead, and we'll be talking about the Black Fantastic, the idea of how we use speculative fiction in the spaces of technology, entrepreneurship, and cultural development. And so the idea is that we want to show a future that's both inclusive and representative of spaces that we all want to be a part of and find agency and appreciation. And so for me and Dedren Snead, and who am I, why am I staying on the stage? We'll have a moment to describe and talk a bit about that. So for myself, Dedren Snead. So I'm from the United States, born in a small pig farm called Snow Hill, North Carolina. The idea is that I'm an artist, futurist, also working in social entrepreneurship and how we can use technology, also culture and business for social good. Consider myself a creative technology, where I'm a translator of sorts from between how technology can help artists better fund and find their voice, as well as how creatives can be involved in the technical renaissance we find ourselves in. Also a consultant for spaces in the metaverse, the idea of being a consultant with Meta and some other pretty straightforward spaces of the idea of how the computers and technologies see us, our Blackness and interpretations of culture. And at the end of the day, I'm a very big nerd, right? So the idea is I work with computers and games, collected toys as a kid, and always wanted to see the things that didn't represent me, didn't represent my family or my culture. So the idea is I had to figure out how to make them. And so that's been my space with Subsume. And so in Atlanta, Georgia, where I have a Subsume studio space, we work as a Black think tank of how can we use technology, creativity, and community as a resource and a space to have a complete and intrinsic future for us all. A bit from me as far as of my graduation and kind of my claim to fame of how did I get into the space of Afrofuturism. So the idea is I've always been appreciative of this space. The idea is collected comic books as a kid. And so my very first job out of college was that I went to work for a company called Toyota, right? And so they have a global space for their marketing department called the International Marketing Education Division. The idea is how do we get this car out into new and representative spaces? And at that time, 2012, there was this movie that came across our desk called Black Panther, right? You might have heard of it. The idea, though, is that Toyota and these spaces had not. And the idea of how to reach a new affluent group of Black cultural people who could buy these cars, wanted to see themselves represented where they didn't see themselves in traditional commercials. I pitched that we should put a Lexus car in this new Black Panther movie. And so that's what they did, and sold a lot of these cars and a lot of these things. And then I also realized that my great idea that I brought to Toyota didn't benefit me, didn't benefit my immediate culture or space. While a fantastic thing on your resume, the idea is why couldn't I do this for myself? Why couldn't I help other people find and build the same opportunity? And so for that, working in social media for their space of getting into their first few million followers, I figured out how could we build relationships with people that we wanted to see themselves represented in fantasy, science fiction, and basically in this geek culture. And so from that, Subsume was born. Now, the idea of what we talk about in Afrofuturism or in the space really is futurism and trying to understand what do we mean by that. So the idea that we may have all seen things that at that time didn't exist, but we see the pathway for it to be. So the idea here is a very popular thing, Star Trek, early 1960s, right? So most people probably know this original series that came out, but the importance of this really is a resonance in space of futurism. The idea is the gentleman that we see here in the middle is one of the original developers of the flip phone, but he saw the Star Trek phone where they talk to each other across planets in between each of the episodes, which did not exist in the 1960s. Mobile technology was in its nascent space, but the idea is there was a whole generation of people on television that saw this device and they were obsessed with it. When are we going to have a device like this? We have a landline phone, but we don't have a remote phone. So he developed the Star Trek phone. That Star Trek phone in 1996 was $1,000, but it sold over, I think, 10 million units. But the idea of a mobile phone that you could flip, close, and have access to as a public space revolutionized technology. That brought about the internet age. It brought about mobility and a lot of other components. And the idea is that things that may exist in fantastic spaces now, in the practical sense of technology, will soon be. So in this space, what was seemed magical in 1960, here in 2023 is very standard fare. Everyone has a cell phone. The idea is, while we see the space of futurism, this is what we want to use as our precedent of how we can see Blackness utilized in that same future. And so the idea of Blackness in this fantastic space is Afrofuturism. The idea, again, that we've talked about here, and really is a very general template of a space of like Black Panther. The idea of seeing narratives of Black culture and a Black expansionism, the idea of creativity from a historic and also in a futuristic space, being able to be really disseminated and appreciated across multiple cultures and multiple spaces. So the idea is there's a lot more to Afrofuturism, of course, than Black Panther, but the space of seeing where this was a cultural shift for a lot of people, particularly in entertainment, does have a precedent, as we saw before, that when you see this in entertainment spaces, then we're creating a conversation, whether that's active or passive, that these changes can be made. And so the idea of the creating our realities, and that's really what the space that we want to talk about for creators, particularly in art, music, and media, is that what we create in these spaces soon become these realities. And so this is the importance by which we need to see Black culture represented in authenticity, but also in agency. And so, of course, some more traditional models being Black Panther, the works of Octavia Butler, the music of Janelle Monáe and Sun Ra, are a lot of the keystone components that we turn to when we think about the traditional sense of Afrofuturism. And so the idea is what we create today will be these templates that we, as well as the machines and AI services that we're looking to use, will use as points of reference tomorrow. So that's why it's pertinent that we have to create authentic music, media, and services, because we're actively creating that reality in the sense of our cultural senses of self. And so for me, one of the components that I've worked on in this space is called Sorghum and Spear. The idea is that this is a comic book series that I created when I was in college. Again, at the same time, this was a way for me to represent and find out about Black history, Black culture, but also work around a group of people that really didn't see themselves represented. And so for me, stories of me playing Dungeons and Dragons at my high school and college, I collected them and made them into a storybook. I could draw, so I drew some of the characters. I started bringing other people in, and eventually this became something we played every weekend on campus. And then after coming from Lexus, the idea was that I could create this as a comic book as I started going to more spaces like New York Comic Con. And again, not seeing myself represented in these spaces, wanting to continue to create it. So Sorghum and Spear itself works in the space of sword and soul, the idea of African fantasy using African folklore, history, and invited futurism to be a space where we can create new narratives. And so for this African fantasy, we work on it in an anthology sense, the idea that we invite creators from throughout the diaspora to be a part of it. So we work not only in the United States, but across Latin America and in the continent to see where we can find new stories, new storytellers, and also build our own creative acumen to build larger projects together. Particularly about this story is that there's only women. So the idea is that this is a story about young girls that grew up during a time of monsters. So we use this as a space to look at the Blackness of our, not only of our characters, but seeing Black women as protagonists and antagonists we normally don't see in traditional media and services. So we offer this as an opportunity for us also to do more cultural narratives, more creative design, as well as bringing in new and appreciated talent, very much like our absent but always appreciated Cherie Renee Thomas, who's also a collaborator on this particular project. And so we work on this in the space of multimedia, or we may say as transmedia. The idea of working on this not only as a traditional comic book in a traditional media space, but also working on this as a video game with Xbox, and also using this as a narrative space to have cultural conversations as well as intellectual ones in collegiate spaces such as this. And from there, this series of speculative fiction, we work on not only as a comic, but also again as a prose narrative to bring in writing talent as well. And the idea again is that what we need to see, we need to believe, and we need to build. And so the story here again of a generation of young girls that grew up during the time of monsters. I have a couple of copies and we'll show and showcase those as we close these things out. But the idea is that unless we create things in this space, that we won't ever see a television show like this. We'll never have writing rooms, Black writers rooms, Black women-led writers rooms that showcase fantasy and the fantastic in that sense. And so we can look at the sense of Afrofuturism as being a cultural catalyst, but we need it to be a conversational catalyst in the spaces of popular media and entertainment, because these are the spaces that we, particularly our young culture and young creators of tomorrow, are looking at their resources, their spaces. So we can have Naruto, we can have all these other components, but we seem to be some type of bridge or opportunity when we're looking at telling Black stories with agency. And as said, and much better and much more intelligently in the conversations prior, we do have to have that authority and that agency in the way that we bring our stories to life, as well as how we pass along the opportunity to build our own stories within our own communities. So looking next from there, another example, keeping back to the original space of Star Trek. This is again, I think, a very keynote component to how Afrofuturism in the space of Black representation has an indirect impact on technology and future. So here we have the timeless Nichelle Nichols, the ancestor now, but at the time, when we look at this in the late 1960s, where I think like 1959, where this is the second season of Star Trek, and she plays Lieutenant Uhura, as we see an intelligent Black woman on a spaceship, translating languages and basically being a lifeline of communication for the USS Enterprise. The idea is that at this time, Black people are not on television. There's not roles that are built for them, particularly showing them as intelligent, absolutely not for Black women of intelligence. So the idea of this being a very similar role was one that a lot of people saw, but did not see that as a continuous space of representation, including Miss Nichols herself. So to her, this was just another acting role, right? And the story, of course, is that she wanted to go to theater, but there was a particular fan at home that wanted her to stay on the show. And that would be Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, and who saw the importance of her being in that space. The idea is that you need to see a smart Black woman in space. People need to see this, that in the height of this of civil rights movement, that this was one of the constant and consistent role models of Black success, that there was a future that Black people were not enslaved, were not oppressed, were not segregated, but were able to move about an agency. And so with that, of course, the stories that she stayed on to the show. But as that show concluded, the next connection for Ms. Nichols was that she was brought in by NASA to recruit young women to be a part of their new NASA program to put women into space. And so, of course, the idea of Ms. Nichols being a fantastic fictional character, now her persona is being brought into the real world, into spaces of technology, to now recruit talent to also be that part of tomorrow. And as that story goes, the recruitment of, say, Sally Ride, also Dr. Mae Jemison here, who was the first African-American woman in space, makes that the completion of how Afrofuturism can be used in the space of the fantastic to create a future of tomorrow. And now Dr. Jemison herself, with the 100-Year Spaceship Project, has a completely new generation of people that they influence. And the idea, again, that this is the next perpetuation of how Afrofuturism in action can be applied. So from Star Trek to NASA and beyond, this is a real world and practical sense of how Afrofuturism can be used to create narratives of change in technology and shared spaces. Right? And so the idea of like, how do all these things connect? The idea is that people need to see themselves in these spaces which are fantastic today to be the practical change makers of tomorrow. And so for us, working with the Nichelle Nichols here in the space where she helped us write and develop our Sorghum and Spirit television show, while not able to be completed to air, we both understand the importance, likewise, of a legacy of Black excellence and Black support in creative spaces, needing to be recognized, appreciated, and built upon. So as we saw with Ms. Nichols, being able for us now to talk about the digital sense of self, how Blackness comes in technology, interprets, appreciates, or maligns the way that Black creators are set. So of course, we are all familiar with things such as ChatGPT, also Midjourney in the way that art is created. The idea is that those data sets have to include us in the ways that we want to be represented. And so for us, creating Sorghum and Spear is a way that we change that data set and that narrative, where in the sense that from my CNN interview, we were talking about Jim Code, the idea of how systematic racism in data sets can bring about bias in technology. And so the idea is that if we don't change that data set by creating more authentic and appreciated spaces, that we ourselves are going to be marginalized out of this next digital revolution. And so the idea of that connection is a young girl that sees herself in our book and sees and learns about the legacy of a Nichelle Nichols, who's again impacted NASA, Star Trek, and beyond, and how our work with Subsume hopes to appreciate as a fan and as a collaborator to build a new generation of creators. And really the idea of, staying included, where historical narratives in this space need to be considered, not only from a technology standpoint, but the way that technology impacts policy, education, and healthcare also is going to be complete to the experiences that we see in tomorrow. And so the idea of being included in the digital as a digital citizen is that we're being created in a multitude of ways. And again, the idea of how do we extrapolate Blackness as a way that we ourselves are able to create our own stories, create our own narratives, and have agency and authority of how those are created and disseminated through a digital conversation, means that we have to be both imaginative and intentional of how we build our creative capital. And again, a couple of lists here to not go throughout, but the idea is that we have to reimagine our technological narratives. How do we find equity and equality in those narratives, not only just across the diaspora of Blackness, but as we identify ourselves as humans, from the sense of how we build our communities, both digitally and remotely, digitally and here in the real world, but also in all of the breadth of our humanity. And really from the space now of entrepreneurship, how do we as creatives find our space in this? So we can say technology should appreciate and understand us, But what we develop right now is only in its most practical sense that we control. But we're slowly but surely giving that control to machines, to data sets, and to technologies. And our understanding is that we as humans have a finite capability, but we as creatives still have an infinite amount of potential. And so for us as artists, as musicians, as producers, these are the roles that you can find your opportunities to still impact that set and stay included in the waves of entrepreneurship, of building businesses. Because a lot of times when we talk about technology and the way that it works in culture, a lot of us as artists feel like we're not coders, we're not developers. We don't build that technology, so that technology doesn't apply to us. So we want to make sure that we showcase and show that like the spaces that we already create in from an activism standpoint, from academia, from literature, and from production of services. And these are the ways that we can, as entrepreneurs, look to build and develop those components. And really at the end of this is we want to make sure that we all understand when we're talking about Afrofuturism, that this future is built upon stories like ours, that our culture, our narratives, our history, and what we see and perceive just in the human experience is really what the world is built upon. And so a lot of times we look at Afrofuturism more as spaces of future and thinking that it's something that's already predetermined. It's always something that's beyond our reach or that we don't impact. But understanding that the amalgam of data that we're looking at building from an AI future, the amalgam of those stories, particularly those that are marginalized or underrepresented, are really the authentic and unmined resources that will be the narratives of change. And so we just want to make sure that everyone understands, particularly and that's our mission statement with Subsume, that everyone stay included, not just be included for a singular standpoint, but we're all creating a future that's a shared future for all. And to that, that was kind of a blur through, but I want to make sure that I offer an opportunity for questions. And again, appreciate everyone's time and consideration. You good? Oh. Young man in front, yes.
So, how do you come up with the dream of plan for Subsume?
Thank you. So I think the idea of Subsume as a business plan, we had to understand that we needed to have both a technology acumen, but also an untapped resource that would be like the space that we were working in. So the business plan, really I looked at where were the models that were really impacting on a lot of these spaces. So I looked at things like Vice Media. So people heard of Vice. Also looked at Marvel and Disney, but also looked at Supreme, skateboard company out of New York, early 80s, is now like a global brand. The idea of subsume itself, meaning to be including something into something else. I wanted to make a business that would be represented on two ends. The idea of knowing that we had to have a physical product, but we can't outsource our humanity in that sense. But we also have to understand how technology can be used as a tool, as a resource, and as a collaborator instead of as an opponent. And so for us, we wanted to make a bilateral component of Subsume to be creative, be a creative studio, create technology and create stories that we control. The glasses. Yeah, so please. Está bien. Gracias. English.
No, de verdad, yo no quiero hacer una pregunta, sino decir que me parece muy interesante porque tú pones tan claro cómo imaginar el futuro puede ser lo real y cómo ese futurismo puede darle también posibilidades más allá de más a la actividad cuando nos proyectamos desde estos referentes o estos imaginarios hacia un futuro posible y mejor para la comunidad, cómo podemos hacerlo realidad. Al traerlo acá como un proyecto, el proyecto tiene mucha importancia para la comunidad y para educar a través de la historia a nuestros niños, a todos en general, cómo disfrutar otras posibilidades me parece muy interesante un poco lo que has explicado al traer el ejemplo de la ley, cómo una realidad, cómo luego cómo es la historia y la gente llega a una persona a espacio de la ciencia. Entonces, pareció bien traída y está es lo que ustedes están haciendo ojalá podamos tener la posibilidad de
So, so respond in English, but first off, the sentiment and appreciation is absolutely going to be our pleasure to work with someone like yourself, right? And in being in the space, I think we as Subsume could not exist, without people like yourself. So we first off want to thank you for that consideration. But yeah, absolutely. I think what we have to understand that like the work that we have, like the creative energy that exists not only in this room, on this campus, within this community, that's, if we keep with the example of, say, Black Panther, right? Our culture is that vibranium, right? Is you cannot duplicate, you cannot replicate that in any other sense, except from the narratives that we're able to build. Really our space, and again, not jumping ahead, but looking at how we can take stories and make that the cultural narrative, that's a very humanistic standpoint. And so technology aside, we'll always have that as humans, no matter how we try to communicate. And so I'm hoping that our company really helps people understand the power that they already have, right? We're inventors, but we're not inventing anything that's not so new that no one can use it, right? Because storytellers, that's our culture for the griots. The idea of like our history for a lot of people, that have been marginalized or underrepresented, still their progeny, their future, their people find a way to exist and expand. And so I look at, even in my own simple mind, a slave that couldn't read, imagining a freedom that absolutely didn't exist in their time, that didn't exist in the generation, 5 generations, 7 generations, but they believed. That's why we stand in a university like this today. We have these around the world because someone a long time ago believed. And so I think that's the very core of what we want with Subsume, is we want to believe. We can believe that the things that we build will last and will impact. And so I appreciate that consideration, and not to over answer, but no, we love that. Oh, sir, please, thank you.
I'm curious about your data collection. Can you say more about maybe some of the methods you use?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great conversation. So I think first and foremost is that we as Subsume, we have a lot of physical and present spaces, right? So the idea is that we work with, for example, our space in Atlanta, we work with the AUC, like our kind of core 4 HBCUs of Spelman, Morehouse, Morris Brown, and Clark Atlanta. So we're very intentional to work and build services in the communities that we're trying to build. So a lot of that for like our CRM or how we take attendance, how we follow up, we're very intentional to build it in a space that already has that. Also, we're working with the AUC data center. So we're wanting to be intentional of how can we level up, how we bring in our information. So we work from everything from like a general book fair to now trying to build virtual reality spaces. And so we do that already as well, but trying to take a lot of that data that we get and trying to pass it along and partner up with people that have that as a point of expertise. That's really how we're trying to build our current data set. And right now we're working with a couple of universities, particularly with MIT, of how can we collect data sets from underrepresented youth and students. For example, I think for us, just having that hybrid model of having in-person conversation communications, we're here to build data sets where we think of in the field, but also looking at building digital spaces, which we've done about the past 2 to 4 years, and looking at having that digital narrative as a component of it as well. Now, is that 100%? By no stretch, but I think for us, we're trying to understand the incongruities of traditional data sets now. And again, I think our partnership with the AUC Data Center is really where, we're working hard on that this year. And I think as we kind of talked about having a physical space that we can also draw and understand a singular community like in Southwest Atlanta that has a lot of opportunity, but also has a lot of potential pitfalls to like long-term growth for Black communities. But also from a global sense, people are looking at that space as being a solution center for a lot of the cultural, social, economic things of Black innovation. That's where we're just trying to figure out best practices now, but that model of in-person and virtual have been what we've been working on. So thank you. Thank you. Sí, gracias.
Estaba pensando en el caso particular de Colombia, un país con muchas barreras sociales para el acceso a la tecnología, particularmente yo creería como mucho más rigor de la comunidad afrodescendiente. ¿Cómo promover este tipo de iniciativas orientadas a promover el afrofuturismo por esas barreras sociales para el acceso a la tecnología? Sé que en el caso particular de los Estados Unidos hay toda una serie de antecedentes que han posibilitado que de alguna manera lleguemos al momento presente y encontremos estas referencias. O digamos, esto supuso toda una lucha previa por llegar a estos escenarios, emprender estas iniciativas y lograr tener referentes de esta calidad. En nuestros contextos, si bien hay expresiones ya muy acabadas, muy visibles, no son generalizadas, son particulares, son muy aisladas. Entonces, creo que Lisa, el movimiento de especulación afrocolombiana, tiene un desafío muy grande en ese sentido. ¿Sí? Entonces, ¿cuáles serían esas formas de empezar a promover en nuestras comunidades ese deseo de romper esas barreras sociales, ¿sí? De acceso a la tecnología, para que de alguna manera ese futuro que ya imaginamos, ¿sí? Pueda empezar a ser parte de nuestro presente? Si podemos empezar a trabajar en él en nuestro presente, entender cuáles son los esfuerzos que tenemos que hacer ahora para acercarnos a nuestro presente.
Thank you very much. I understand and appreciate the space of like a lot of Colombian residents, particularly the Afro-Colombian art collaboration and movement. And so this is something that I was thinking on my way here. So I do have a little bit of context to maybe share. The idea of like recognition and empowerment of what you already have, I think is very important. So for example, like where we are with BSAM, as I think the idea of attending and creating Afro-Colombian art events, the idea of staying informed at festivals, being able to utilize your social platforms and personal networks to make and attract a broader audience, I think is a very initial component that we can do. Next from there is being able to collect in spaces Afro-Colombian artwork, been able to bring recognition and value to Afro-Colombian art to a broader art market that already exists. Being able to display and share that artwork in your home or in your communities, I think that's a way to promote dialogue about Afro-Colombian culture, identity, and appreciation. Also looking to collaborate and establish partnerships with other spaces in your business community. For instance, being able to do event planning, featuring Afro-Colombian artists in your programs and projects in a larger space. And again, that space of partnerships and helping them empower themselves as business entities here in Colombia also will help them with their own social empowerment, economic empowerment. And I think that's a couple of spaces of that artistic growth and development that can work. Thinking, of course, from a technology standpoint of how this also can be a space where AI can help perhaps low resource or high need communities. I think there's always access to information and services. If nothing else, we can use AI to disseminate large pieces of information into smaller components. So begin making that where low-income families can be offered guidance from financial standpoints, also revolutionizing services such as like improving healthcare, access to healthcare and services. I think all of these are also part of having to build that underlying support for these communities. But we can talk about art and media and that future, but we also have to appreciate their present conditions. And so whether that's the space of governance, the space of politics, but the space of their own social healthcare and well-being, I think is also something that we can use and utilize AI, machine learning and component. And I think lastly is just education and skill development. We're seeing less and less need for four-year degrees to have long-term career development, right? The idea of things of low code and no code may not be immediately available now, but building those spaces that might show that expertise, particularly among Afro-Colombians, can show and showcase a space of expertise and employability, not only here in Colombia, in this country, but also on a global scale and service. And all it takes is a couple of those opportunities to bring in a global project that could support a community, could support a space, right? An Epic Games coming here to build a group to build something that's an Afro-Colombian led group, funded by Afro-Colombian businesses that is telling a story that's narrated in that sense. I think those are some ways that not only could we find like, this is a recommendation, but a intentional path of progress that people can see. They may not see the immediate effects today, but I think constant and consistent leveraging of that is that community development. And I think that's how you build, I think you build that solution space.
All right.
Thank you. No. Madam, this question. Oh, thank you.
Me encantó este proyecto que presentaste. Me quedé enamorada de los libros que nunca me han tomado un primer ejemplo como este. Presentaste un artículo genial que me tiene mucha alegría de mundo. También quiero preguntar hacia la familia de
Thank you, man. It's a privilege, and I think the opportunity of us just sharing spaces like this together is just simply from your your 9 words and sentiments are just really heartfelt and appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Perfect.
Okay.
Oh, a good tree. Good tree. Thank y'all. Great.
Okay, we continue with Philip Butler, and I gonna do the introduction about him. Yeah, voy a hacer la introducción de Philip Butler. And él es un académico internacional cuyo trabajo se centra principalmente en la intersección de la neurociencia, la tecnología, la espiritualidad y la negritud. ¿Ok? Bastante interesante. Utiliza la sabiduría de estos espacios para realizar un análisis crítico y constructivo sobre el posthumanismo negro. También la inteligencia artificial y las realidades futuras pluriversas. Recordemos que hablaban ahorita Reynaldo del pluriverso, ¿cierto? Él es fundador del proyecto Seeker. Seeker es Seeker, ¿ya? Una inteligencia artificial conversacional distintivamente negra con capacidades de salud mental. Es decir, se enfoca en el healing, en la sanación, en la salud mental, esta inteligencia artificial. El doctor Butler es director asociado del Instituto de Inteligencias Artificiales LIFT, donde dirige el proyecto 8020, donde el instituto trabaja para cambiar la forma en que las computadoras ven a las personas o en que se relacionan con los lenguajes culturales interactivos y construyen y usan los datos para la construcción de modelos de propiedad. Bueno, hasta ahí ya tengo la traducción. Ok, hasta ahí es la traducción en español. Entonces, también es autor de Black Transhumanism, Liberation Technology, Spirituality and Technology. Y más recientemente es editor del Critical Black Futures, Speculative Theories and Exploration. O sea, démosle toda una bienvenida a Phillips con un aplauso.
Hey, greeting. Can everybody? Greetings, everybody. Glad to be here today. We'll talk a little bit about Black folks in a post-human future. And so I know we talked a little bit about transhumanism today, but we're going to extend that conversation a little bit, talking about Blackness in a post-human landscape. I want to start by asking this question, which pretty much is the foundation of this talk, which is where are the Black people in post-human futures? We could talk about post-human futures in terms of a post-human future that is the result of a technological advancement, so much that the augmentation that people have allowed their bodies to undergo puts them in a position where they can no longer relate to humanity. An example would be if I was so strong that I could pick up this building, then my reference to pain or my reference to what is heavy probably would no longer be something that would be relatable to normal people. Similarly, if I could hold multiple dimensions at once in my mind and then bring them to manifest, it will probably be a little bit different than our ability to just kind of imagine in our heads and nothing happens. And so this is a type of post-human future, but the one I'm specifically talking about today could lead us there, but it's one that is more so an epistemic or epistemological break from the ways in which we are currently oriented towards the world. And so I want to start by saying this. I feel like I'm in a place in my career where I'm tired of like critiquing white people. And I'm saying this mainly because like we could probably spend an hour and some change like just talking about like what's wrong with like post-humanities from a European perspective. But I really just want to talk about the emphasis on building Black stuff. And that's mainly because when we look at post-humanism from a European perspective, we really can't expect white folks to build a really good version of it for Black folks anyways. And so it's kind of up to us to step into this particular arena and begin to build things that reflect us, that hold seriously and take seriously who we are. And then as a result of that, they become something that emerges from our own collective and interrelational consciousness as a result. And so this is, again, not less of a critique on white posthumanism so much as it is the beginning of an expansion of Black posthumanism as I'm beginning to kind of shape this particular discourse. And so a couple things to expect, and we're not going to be here for long, at least I say that. I also grew up in a Black church. So if I say I'm not gonna be here for long, that might also mean we might be here for a while. And so the two things we're gonna talk about, 4 Black scholars, and then talk about Black posthumanism as an anti-humanistic space. So I want to start with Alexander Wahilier. In his book, he talks about this particular quote that stands out to me. It's the greatest contribution to critical thinking of Black studies and critical ethnic studies more generally is the transformation of the human into a heuristic model and not an ontological fait accompli. And I think this is particularly helpful because we're talking about or thinking about human, what it means to be human in this particular iteration of reality. We're also really seriously talking about a particular intellectual lineage that stems from the Enlightenment. And so we're having specific European thinkers in mind that have influenced our idea of what a human is. And so I want us to keep in consideration for this. For me, I'm defining a human as a universal construct. It's not necessarily something that is helpful to us to relate to humanity. I'm going to drop this bomb on you really quickly. In this framework, humans don't exist. The human is a technology of white supremacy that is made to maintain stratification and keep people outside of its social structure. And if that is the case, then it is a used technology of whiteness, which means it is something that is constructed by whiteness, which also suggests that the human as we understand it is not something that white people can even say that they are. And if white folks aren't human, then the things that we're attempting to be in terms of being human suggests that we're not human either. And to be human is to continue to act and function and attempt to be part of a particular social structure that would no longer benefit us and never really has, at least in this particular iteration of reality. And so Black posthumanism very, very frankly upfront says there are no humans, and this is where we begin to build. So I want us to highlight these 4 authors here, or these 4 thinkers, because this is the particular lineage in which I'm engaging. And I think this is important. I'm very, very intentional about engaging as engaging as little amount of white scholarship as possible, because I'm attempting to build within a particular epistemological universe or multiverse or pluriverse that allows for as many iterations of Blackness and Black thought to exist as possible. But I want that to happen in conversation with other Black thinkers. Now, this is also not a knock on Black thinkers who have come before me, right? James Cone, the father of Black theology, right, who was someone who I'm, in a particular lineage as well, he only had kind of white scholars to engage with, right? In the late 1960s, his Black theology, Black power, were really only engaged like Paul Tillich, because Paul Tillich is who he studied with, at least who in his mind, and also who he kind of was in conversation with. But in 2023, I have the privilege of having come behind and in conversation with some of my contemporaries who are talking about this. So these are the folks that we're going to be engaging with today. And I hope that you forgive, and I hope that they also forgive that if they're seeing this, right, especially as a kid, my artistic expression of them, right? So we have Sylvia Winter, Zakiya Imam Jackson, Amir Césaire, and Frantz Fanon. So these folks, I think, become part of the epistemological bedrock of what we're going to be framing with, and you'll see in just a second. And so when we talk about Sylvia Winter's work, we're also talking about the ways in which he utilizes notions of the overrepresentation of man. And so again, if we're kind of taking a step back a couple of slides ago, right, this idea of the human, this idea of what the humanity is, again, is very much so centered around white maleness and the patriarchal construction of what it means to be a part of this particular emotive embodiment, and then the degrees of separation of difference. So you have white maleness, and within this binary, you have white femaleness, and then you have these degrees of separation that in many cases in a social and political and even a judicial sense allow for people to be considered human, extended the forgiveness that humans that receive, and also receive right, the type of second chances in a social political landscape that humans often have had, right, the opportunity to experience. And so when she's critiquing and unpacking the epistemologies that support this overrepresentation of the human, she's also talking about the ways in which this cosmogenical approach has created this kind of creation story of where people came from, and the ways in which this type of white supremacist and white-oriented creation story is proliferated even into our ways of thinking to today. And so you have these origin stories in which people have decided where they came from, how the world began, and as a result, like how things ought to be in the world, which leads us to concepts of ontogenesis is kind of like ontological, epistemological, metaphysical framework that exists kind of outside of our immediate tangible realities, but in many cases support and uphold the very things that we kind of think to be so. Which then carries over into this kind of sociogenic space where if we perceive things to be the so and we do not question the things that we take that has been kind of offered to us, right, then it becomes this kind of cyclical, repetitious social landscape that perpetuates itself until somebody asks the question, right? One of the things that, at least part of particular kind of histories I come from is David Pacini would always, he was one of my professors in grad school, he'd always say the thing that you are have the most commitment to requires that you ask the toughest questions to. And so the things that we take for granted, the things that we don't question in reality are often the things that we probably are the most committed to. Like when Black folks say, you know, we are human, or we have to respect our humanity, something that we are seemingly intrinsically tied to. But if we question that, then there's something I think on the other end of that, right? And we could say it'd be something like divinity, but then also raise the question, why human and divine? Why that's not be divine? And so if this is part of this kind of mode of thinking, it offers us the opportunity to engage in kind of this breaking through the virtuality or the facade of our humanity and the social reality of surrounding it. This opens up into this kind of greater space, I think. And then we talk about Zakiya Jackson's work within Becoming Human. She talks about this idea of blackening bodies, right? So bodies that were not necessarily Black at one point, but have been blackened by this kind of social and ontogenic space. But then she highlights something I think that is particularly important, this idea of plasticity. And so plasticity around bodies suggests that bodies can be anything. But when placed in relationship with a disproportionate power structure, the bodies that can be anything are often engaged with a type of cartography or mapping. These maps of meaning that are placed onto these plastic and blackened bodies allow for these bodies to be sat within this kind of marginalized and historically oppressed kind of space. And so the beauty of the plasticity, I think, is an opportunity for a turn that allows for people to take ownership of the type of ways in which you could be something else. And so, but again, her turn towards the plastic, I think, helps us to at least recognize the ways in which our bodies, Black bodies specifically, have meant one thing in one space, and over time and over various geographies, they have had other layers of meaning placed onto them that have been that have shifted the ways in which they've related to themselves, let alone related to other people. When we start talking about Aimé Césaire and Frantz Fanon, we begin to look more so at these social political movements. And I think it's important when we talk about Aimé Césaire's work to talk about the anti-colonial aspects of it. And, you know, depending upon your relationship to Césaire and his understanding of departmentalization, right? He chose to keep Martinique a part of France. And so you could in some ways argue that that's not anti-colonial at all. But the ways in which he's engaging in disalienation, coming home to himself, suggests that he's coming home to not only his body, but also recognition of the landscape that he's a part of. And so he's engaging in a particular intellectual and kind of, I think, psychic critique of where he came from and the ways in which you have to hold the space in which you are a part of, and in many ways kind of lay that boundary. And so anti-colonialism in this space, even though within his example, he maintained a connection to this larger kind of francophone and quite frankly connected to France more broadly, he was doing something within an internal landscape that I think has kind of important implications. And so just really quickly moving to Frantz Fanon, we really can't breeze through France. But the idea of this new human, you could argue that the ways in which he frames this new human is doing so in almost a transhumanist critique, because I think Frantz Fanon is very much so grafted in at a type of human that is connected to his context, that is becoming a social political actor and is very much so okay with violence in a real way. But in doing this, been recognized in the type of new human that he's creating a different prototype, a new archetype of a citizen or a subject or a figure that you could very much so suggest that if it's antithetical to the colonizing structures that were engaging him and his folks, that in and of itself suggests that it's beyond this kind of Hegelian dichotomy of master slave, because the ways in which his context was set up was very much so connected to a subservience. And so breaking from subservience suggests that you can no longer be connected to a master slave relationship in a way that allows for that subservience to maintain itself. And so one of the ways that he achieves this is through actual violence, but we can see through Sartre's work in Introduction to the Rest of the Earth that epistemic violence is, in many cases, the introduction to actual violence. And it's important to think about, mainly because without an epistemic violence, you cannot actually allow people to face the types of thoughts and the types of questions that would open them up to considering other opportunities, including actual violence. And so this decolonization that Fanon is engaging in or talking about is one that we can think of in terms of delinking and detaching, right? Kind of in a sense of like Walter Mignolo, you become critical of the colonial project in which you're a part of, the ways in which you maintain coloniality in your thinking and in your being, and then choosing to do something else. And so these four thinkers and these four kind of constructs, I think, are important for us to hold in tension as we begin to think about this kind of Black post-humanist framing. So I imagine none of you have ever been in my class because I've never seen you there before, but it's okay. And so getting to know me suggests you're going to recognize that I do a lot of drawings with a lot of arrows, even if it's on a PowerPoint. So within this framing, I want us to start with the cosmogony, ontogenesis, overrepresentation, and sociogeny of a winter, right? This becomes the instantiation of the green arrows that take us in different directions. And so the overrepresentation of man, we're going to start going to the north, right? It allows for a particular plasticity of other people, or at least taking advantage of this plasticity, because if people can be anything, then the overrepresentation of one particular orientation suggests that it pushes out, marginalizes, or erases other orientations. And so the plasticity or the potential, right, of certain peoples gets shrinked because they are bombarded with images of one particular type over themselves. And so you can think about that, the way this plasticity and this overrepresentation then maps itself onto these bodies, right? You can see this is the ways in which Black folks, or anybody in particular, right, can embody anti-Blackness in these ways. And so taking advantage of plasticity and the cartographies or the mapping onto these bodies also, again, leads us to this blackening, right? What does it mean for folks to become blackened? You see this kind of perpetual circle, right? You could enter this conversation of blackening, mapping, or plasticity in any one of those three, but it's going to continue to oscillate depending upon where you are. And then if we take the overrepresentation of man and begin to engage in the type of epistemic violence, right, that Frantz Fanon is talking about, then we're also engaging in, again, this act of decolonization. And so epistemic violence leading to decolonization also kind of suggests the engagement of this new human. And so within this space, getting to the bottom, right, of decolonization, it allows us to eventually get to the anti-colonial. And so for me, within this framing, not that it has to be a particularly linear process, but decolonization precedes the anti-colonial. And so by separating oneself, becoming critical of your connections to coloniality allows you to then map out the boundaries of who you are. And so this becomes particularly important because the act or the process of disalienation or the process of coming back to oneself is part of the mapping out of oneself. So taking ownership of the type of plasticity that you have in your body allows for you to come back to your body. And so in this particular internal process of mapping out these boundaries and then becoming clearer about who you are and or who you want to be allows for, again, this kind of cosmological or cosmogenic space to take place. And so the creativity that emerges when you come closer to your body. And so just a quick aside, each one of us in this room is a particular genetic expression, right, of of our parents. And sorry, I'm a bio nerd in this way, right? So we have these haploid cells that make us up. But then if you look at the type of base pairs that we have, they account for not only every relative that has come before us, but also things out beyond that. And so it gives us this larger connection to primordial spaces, to cosmic spaces, so on and so forth. And all of that suggests that the presentation of you at this very moment in and of itself is an anomaly, right? In and of itself is some kind of fantastic thing. For all of those possibilities to come into play, but still have you be present, suggests that they're in this world of quote unquote, I won't say randomness, in this world of stochasticism, right? In this world of kind of this musical randomness allows for the presentation of one iteration. And so again, when I say come back to your body, it's also a recognition of the complexity of who you are and the ways in which and all that it took for you to actually be here today. And so when you become clearer about how you are oriented and how you understand yourself as anti-colonial space, it gives you a greater sense of how you begin to orient the world and what kind of origin stories and cosmological stories you either want to be connected to or you create as a result of a recognition of who you are. And so within the cosmological creation that results from coming to yourself in the anti-colonial space, you then have the stars around the ontogenesis and the sociogenesis. So by creating these kind of these cosmological origin stories, you also create this epistemic reality. And so this allows for a kind of a larger shift in perception that has sociological implications. If the shift in epistemology and perception changes, then the ways in which you orient towards social reality also changes. And so I hope these arrows make sense now, because they're not going anywhere. So here we go. And so taking all this in consideration, this is my kind of offering, right? So within this framework, when you have this different cosmological, cosmogenic creativity that spurns forth, one of the things that Dr. Anderson alluded to earlier, right, is that there's a recognition that if you have a different orientation to the world is not necessarily the planet. So the planet could be, are the physical materials, but in this construction, the world is more of a social epistemic orientation. And so if you have a different orientation to the world, again, this social epistemic reality, then it requires you to consider, right, a different orientation to the physical environment as well. And so this is where we talk about a Black physics. And so we can look at the technologies that we have today primarily as the manifestation of a lineage that has taken seriously Newtonian physics only. And so the question becomes, what happens when you open up the concept of physics to recognize that there's so much that we actually don't know, and that there were so many other empires and architectural geniuses, right, and cultural icons that existed prior to kind of Western expansion. And so what happens when you take Black orientation seriously and then open up and look at the physical realities that might result? I imagine there are new technological advances that are leaps and beyond what we currently have, because again, we have not taken seriously these other modes of being. And this orientation of this Black posthumanist is also the idea of centering Blackness. In the beginning of our conversation, we talked a little bit about not critiquing whiteness anymore, because even when Black folks engage in the critique of whiteness, there's still a centering of whiteness, because whiteness becomes the launch pad of our conversation. And so by starting in the orientation of Blackness and staying there and being intentional about not deviating from that, it has a different kind, it's much more, I think, difficult to describe. Like, we live out of a Black space, but who is actually engaging and thinking about Black spaces without having to reference white spaces as this kind of somehow this oppositional space or this other space that we have to kind of self-reference? And so what does it mean for us to, as a Black post-humanist space, to be self-referencing of Blackness? And so again, within this, it sees itself and it orients itself towards itself. But again, I think undergirding all of this, which I should have had arrows on this slide, I ain't gonna lie. In this regard, the Black physics is gonna be grounded in a notion of uncertainty and disorder. Because I think part of Black realities, what we see around the world today, And I think this has also been turned in very negative ways about the ways in which Black realities have a certain level of uncertainty. Some Black folks don't know what's coming around the corner. They don't know what's next. And this has been historically understood as a negative thing. But the question becomes, I have this thing where I talk, you can either become the chaos, right? Or you can be the person who moves the chaos. And so the question becomes, how do you understand your orientation to reality as either the chaos yourself or as the one who is maneuvering and navigating and the one who is, I don't want to say in control of the chaos, but it's very Star Wars-y, right? Much like this. So, yeah, but that's kind of the idea. And so these are some of the things that I think it's important for us to keep in mind about when it comes into coming back to ourselves and taking very seriously what it means for us to be one with the chaos and be the very thing that is the cusp of the end of the world. And by, again, the world is an epistemic and social reality. And the ways in which Blackness has been pushed out as a result of over-representation of man, it also suggests that an emphasis on Blackness would also be the end of a particular type of reality. And so what happens then when you ground yourself in that reality, that would then be the onset of a new one altogether, and preferably a Black one. I'll leave you today with these 12 tenets of Black posthumanism. They're on my academia.edu, and I think we can get with Fredy and the group about getting this out. But essentially, I'll read this and then kind of take questions. The 12 tenets of Black posthumanism are this: 1, complex knowledge is paradoxical, local, and nonlinear. Number 2, vital energy underlies life and is non-deterministic. And I think this is important. I think I alluded to this when I talk about all that it took for you to be here in this seat today. But also, again, if we are juxtaposing a human as a universal construct, I am the opposite of that. I'm offering as a person or people. Right, we've heard about the Dogon people, we've heard about Egyptians, we've heard about Yoruba people, but a person is local, a person is complex, a person is embodied, and a person is ancient. A person is very much so grounded in the elements of the material world that we live in. Number 3, relativity of the subject is not unsubstantial, right? In physics and mathematics and science, they always talk about significance as a necessary factor for making calculations, but the difference that is often considered insignificant, if you take it seriously long enough, it becomes a much wider gap. And so these are the things that I'm offering that we ought to explore. Number 4, all matter is interconnected due to blurring interdependence. Right, the idea that if you put a mask on for like 21 days, your health will be much different. We see this in solitary confinement. We see this in the ways in which babies who are not giving touch right after birth, right, their health quickly deteriorates. These are all kind of examples of this interdependence. Number 5, non-determinism does not negate supernature, right? That is gods, monsters, specters, shadows, immateriality, right? They are substantive and valuable. Just because you can't see it does not necessarily mean that it's not worth anything. Photons, we can't physically see them, but we see the result of light. It's number 6. The world is a dynamic amalgamation of uncertainty and disorder. We've heard that before. Number 7, language is amongst the most powerful technological prosthetic. Its ability to access emotionality to bolster its reach adds to the potential danger of its reproducibility. Number 8, the human is a facade. I said it before, humans don't exist. I'm gonna stick with that. As an extension of linguistic technology, humans, or the idea of the human, is used to extract, stratify, and destroy people. Again, people are local, complex, embodied, and ancient. Number 9, people are not limited to hairless bipedal beings. This suggests that personhood extends beyond boundaries of those onto-material conceptualizations. That means this desk is a person, this microphone is a person, my iPad is a person, those sneakers are a person, the cat outside is a person. We just never been these things, so we can't relate to them in the same way. Number 10, vitality determines personhood. And so that all that can be a person deserves the rights, privileges, responsibilities of its ensuing relationality. And I had kind of very squarely say, forgive this one for its anthropocentric sensibilities. But basically the idea is vitality is grounded in that which gives life to a form. And so in a person, it's the electrochemical stimulation that keeps your heart in smooth muscles moving. In a chair, it's the way that the atoms move to maintain their cohesion allows the chair to be a chair, so on and so forth. Number 11, whatever happens to existence also happens to people. Again, we can't act like our actions do not have repercussions. And then 12, everything is unfolding. There is no final theory. Thank you.
When I was looking at the diagram here, the civil and military benefits coming together. You think Kasar and Kanan, they had questionable kind of things around development, because if they're talking about human development, it was based on European philosophy. And so that was probably the flaws and some of the things that they were talking about, we were transitioning away from that, and they were talking about the new man. And so that's what I was thinking, you know, I would say, Pam, I would say your first two spots, sitting there, probably. And you know, this thing, then I'm like, there it comes together, but, yeah, that's one thing I do. I think you won me over, you know, we've been talking about this here, but I'm sorry, right now. I'm gonna read the ones that he agendas, but specifically, you said going back and forth. That's what people are calling meta-modernism now, but we say Sankofa. You know, I'm based on geography of reason.
Right.
You know, in terms of that local geographic cartography that is he is referencing. And very well done. Very well done.
Thank you, sir.
Bueno, diciendo que sí, no, yo siento que como es un voltaje, una actividad muy brutal, que nos puede pensar un poco. Me encanta lo que dice acá, que no estamos limitados por la humanidad, es decir, la esencia del espíritu y la conciencia está más allá de nuestros cuerpos, y eso habla mucho de. Es como yo traigo de esto una reflexión para mí, es como la identidad, esa búsqueda de la identidad en medio de todos los conflictos que tienen que ver con la existencia negra. Entonces me parece que muchísimo por escudriñar en lo que nos presenta, y muy interesante poder también reconocer estos diferentes negros que muy poco los tenemos en la academia, todos los académicos en el día, muy poco tenemos acceso a nuestros propios referentes. Cuando dices que se puede ver a los negros, voltear la mirada, siento que hay un llamado a una búsqueda de lo que somos, y entender más allá de la propia religión. Siento que no es de constitución de ellos, pero siento que es una persona confiada. Gracias. No sé si entendí, pero buenísimo.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. So yeah, having these kind of Black benchmarks that folks may not necessarily have access to, I think it's like this is also an invitation for other folks to join in the work, because describing our own realities is not something that we see very often. And in addition, the description of our realities is also not necessarily done so in an academic setting. And so the question becomes, in many ways, how might you describe your setting? Because that also leads us to the complexities of who you are, what makes you up, like, you know, who do you go home to at night? Who raised you? what foods do you eat? Like, what are the things that have made you you? And looking at what they mean to you, but also how they kind of thrust you into the world and make and allow for you to be the type of agent that can create change, that can create their own reality, right? That can take advantage of the plasticity, because I think it's, historically they've looked at our experiences, they've looked at Blackness, and they've labeled it negatively. And so the question I think that I'm raising and the challenge I'm also giving is, so how then do you describe yourself in a way that takes hold of the plasticity, reorients it, and then shifts the world around you as a result? What happens when we don't take on what they've said, but then say what we want to say and then live out of that? So, but yeah, I don't know if it goes beyond Blackness just yet. I think so. One of the offerings that we have is like, be human or be Black. And until we can move beyond this human thing, I'm going to be Black and then live into the fullness of that. And then maybe we can talk about what it means for us to live together.
Yo tengo otra pregunta alrededor de esos dos referentes que hoy se toman para pensar los asuntos. Porque conozco el caso de Eduardo, quizás un pensador afrocaribeño de la isla de Martinica, que tiene un concepto que no enuncia como transfísica. Y este concepto habla sobre la errancia de la identidad del ser humano, a la constante migración del ser humano. Y él lo describe en un escenario caótico donde lo humano es la interminable repetición, ¿sí?, de un patrón, ¿sí?, que reproduce lo inesperado. Entonces, a propósito de esta conversación que nos propone en torno a posthumanismo negro, ¿hay alguna posibilidad para considerar este concepto de transfísica dentro de esta propuesta que nos trae?
Awesome. And I'm just want to be clear. I'm just want to make sure I'm hearing the translator correctly. Did you say chaotic? Okay. Yes. So I think the chaotic is the belly, right? For birthing, right? One of the things I say a lot is that the question is the best technology, right? Language is the best technology for extending, right? But the question is the best technology for getting what's underneath, right? Because you have this thing, that we stand on. But a question of like, does it exist? And even if that's a question you've never heard before, when you begin questioning the thing that you're standing on, the thing that you're standing on somehow disappears. And so, but you find yourself falling into a different space. And wherever you do land, right, you emerge as something new. And so the question, I think, leads us to a new reality. And so, yeah, for me, better than the language is the question, and the question is a chaotic thing because it upends people's it upends the certainty that people lean on, because if you question the thing that people seem to take for granted, then they don't necessarily know what to do, and that is in and of itself is its own form of chaos.
Okay, you have another question. What else? Watching your slides and you're talking about posthumanism, and it's thinking about something that all the time philosophers say, and it is the concept of the Homo sapiens. Yeah. And we were speaking about posthumanism. I was thinking that maybe Homo sapiens was one of the previous postulates about, or a kind of posthumanism in the age, yeah, maybe in that age that they proposed, saying Homo sapiens, maybe that was posthumanism of the time, yeah. So because of that, I want to do a question today. What do you think about human being related when we speak about our black people? Whenever you actually somewhere consider Homo sapiens at all. So what do you think tell me about that? How is the comparison between postmodernism and that? So Homo sapiens.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, in an article I wrote in 2018, it's on making enhancement equitable. It's in the Journal of Post-Human Studies. I raised the question. So before I got to the notion of people or personhood, I had human entity. And so the idea of a human entity takes very seriously like a Whiteheadian framework of an entity as something that exists in space, that is in constant contact with other things. So you have these collisions, also known as events. And so an entity meets another entity, and then things happen. But you have in kind of this like recent iteration of post-humanism, you have this idea of humans, then you have non-human animals, then you have non-human plants and stuff like that, right? And so I was like, maybe human entity is a better way to talk about it. But in this conversation, I raised the question like, are we human like a homo? But even this Homo sapien was created by Linnaeus. Linnaeus was the one that helped kind of create the taxonomy of beings. And so even within this, it still follows this particular kind of Eurocentric framing it's taking advantage of plasticity of everyone by saying we're all this. And so I like the idea of it potentially being a post-humanism of the time, but I think it is a linchpin of humanism in the sense that we have this biological orientation or understanding of what a human is in the larger taxonomy of beings. So you have a Homo sapien, and then you have like another genus and another phylum. And so this Homo sapien exists amongst them, but it still plays into human exceptionalism, right? Because the idea of, the sapien, right, is the one who's questioning. And so this suggests that humans are questioning as opposed to like dolphins or whales or cats don't do that. But we've never been a dolphin, a whale, or a cat. So how do we know that they don't question, right? And so this, again, it kind of speaks back to this kind of anthropocentric framing that suggests that we're somehow better, right, than the environment that we're a part of. But in terms of Black folks and humanity, I think, just because we have like pictures of what it means to be this, and somebody came and told us that it's a human, I think there's a gap, or at least a jump that's being made here. It's like, yes, we have pictures of our people. Yeah, we have depictions of our gods, right? And so like historically, they come from, our tribes, our nations, so on and so forth. But, and you can talk about the notion of like a citizen or at least a being, but I still raise questions about the ways in which this juxtaposition of like what a human being is, because of the ways in which it's been muddied, right, by this particular connection with Europe. And so I would just go right out and say like that Black people are just God. Like we don't have to be human and divine. We're just divine. And it doesn't say that other people aren't. But when you say Black people are, it creates a commotion. So let's just deal with that commotion real quick. And so if that's the case, the Black people are God and everybody else is too. But what does it mean for Black people to really sit in that and come home to being their own gods, right? To having their own house gods and up in the ofrenda or just at the side of the house, like this is my uncle, right? Or he was a legend and we venerate him, or we pour out our libations, right? To, something like that. And so again, it's a recognition of self-worth, of empowerment, and that we have these powers. But again, they're physical powers, but they're not necessarily giving these ethereal qualities. And so the question becomes, what happens when you mix the two? And if you mix the two, again, I think brings us back to this notion, right, of this cosmogony here. And if we can create our own worlds, our own realities, we step into Black pluriverses, and then we have yet to know what that looks like.
Mentioned a couple of times that the Black people have divinity thing. I think that's like when we look at our own philosophical and esoteric consciousness, like Ma'at, the concept of Ma'at tells us that although human is just like any other part of nature, aspects of the being, it requires action. So we can't just say we are God and then our actions don't match that. I think that's part of it. But then I also think about rejecting the idea of human because we do have ancient definitions of human that come before the European definition of human, which is what I was pointing to the words humanity and Kemet, the ancient Egyptian. But also, if we were to throw out the word human, because we say that Europeans invented them, what we do with the word Africa, because it was the Arabs who made us Africa or African, and it was Europeans who called us black. So I think for me, it's more important to skip over, to recognize why we're not looking through that lens, and then look at what it means to be human, what it means to be divine, what it means to be distinct from an African.
Wow, I love that. And at the same time, like, to be human today means something very specific. And so I'm with going back and like attempting to do these things, but it also places us back in this race where we're trying to fit back in. And so if we want to fit in, maybe. But I think there's a heavy limitation social politically for us to try to be human. Because again, if we're already not given the rights, responsibilities, and privileges of a human, and you know what, I didn't mention this, or I wasn't sure if I was gonna get to this today, but we're off, like, this Black post-humanism is also in some ways not necessarily a blueprint, but it is in many ways a preamble, or at the very least, what's the word? What's the part of the book that comes in the beginning? Nah, it's not the epilogue. It's the prologue, right, to a Black nation. And so if we want to play into this notion of humanity, I don't think that gives us the same social political weight, because we're still playing catch up. And if we want to play even or win, then we can't continue to utilize that particular language in this day and age. I don't think. And so but I'm also, but even like the idea of ancient notions of a human, I still raise questions about if that's the word, or if that's not the way we understand the word. And if it isn't the word, and it's just the way we understand the word, then again, it fits us back within this larger landscape of humanity as part of this language that we still can't fit into today, even if we thought we were naming ourselves that back then.
Okay, and so I'm gonna continue doing like as a breve panorama, a brief resume about what is the state of the Afrofuturism in Colombia, okay? So I'm gonna talk with you, I'm gonna show you some artists, some people that is doing Afrofuturism in Colombia and how it is taking shape here in our country. So first of all, for the people that is in the connection, that is through the video, I'm Raymond Andrade, and yeah, I already introduced myself at the beginning of this talk, at the beginning of this conversation. I am doing it in English because I want to reach more people from the United States and for training myself in the use of the language. So, the definition that I have about Afrofuturism is that it is something like as a way of thinking, yeah, that is connected to all the experience that the diaspora, African diaspora, has been developing in the last years, based on all the things that they live in the territory, the culture, and it is connected with some of the pillars like as the aesthetic, the dance, the music, and the literature, the cinema, and all our ancestral knowledge, yeah? So that is the way that I try to do a resume about it. But then today I just want to talk about Afrofuturism in Colombia, yeah? So let me pass this because we already have the people from the United States speaking about Afrofuturism, so I'm gonna go so fast over this part. And just for letting you know, Afrofuturism start with some people in the United States that start to talk about music. From the music, they start to do some explorations. like a Sun Ra, like a Nona Hendrix, as you can see here. And everything about it started around the 60s. But before that, we have some people that start to talk about the future too. So as you can see here, Hernan Poole on Sun Ra was a musician that started to think about how the jazz music can be played with synthesizers, and all the time we was trying to do experimental jazz and that kind of things. So as my goal with this presentation is for speaking about Colombia, I'm gonna continue passing faster through the other slides. And is here the presentation. Octavia Butler, that we already saw her in the presentation of Dedren, yeah. And let's go to the present, yeah. Yeah, that's it. The bottom. So how is the present of the Afrofuturism in Colombia? Actually, we have a new way of Afrofuturism thinkers that are being connected with the Black speculative art movement. Yeah, and that new way of thinkers, start from the literature of Manuel Zapata Olivella. I'm telling this because, for example, Steve Steele, in the course that he gave in the university about Caribbean literature, always speak about Manuel Zapata Olivella and always introduce the text that Manuel Zapata Olivella wrote in the past. So this is a great beginning for all the people that want to know what is going on with Afrofuturism in Colombia. It started with Manuel Zapata Olivella. And then in the present, the Afrofuturism hand is spreading through the people. So just for starting to talk about some Afrofuturism people in Colombia, I just want to introduce you Florence Antonia Gomez. Florence is a master of the speculative pictures and Afrofuturism pictures. As you can see here in his work, she make a mix between the traditional food elements, like as the plantain from the Pacific coast of Colombia, and also mix it with the patterns that we know from Africa. And at the same time, she mixed it with fractals. I love the kind of art that Florence made because she always tried to explain all the process that she do, how she do that process in her Instagram. So if you want to know more about Florence, you can follow the Instagram, as you can see the handle there. Flor de Ébano is the account, and she is amazing. Katia Herrera is another girl that is doing great job. This is an intersection between AI and art made by a person who knows how to use these tools and at the same time polish that with his knowledge, her knowledge. Okay, so that is amazing. And you can find her making illustrations, and his work is posted in Instagram as Creative Power. Rayson Velasquez, which is gonna be presenting this night, his short movie. He is creator of a lot of work related in cinema here in Colombia. He has won prize from the FIXI. He has been writing also some histories, like as the bottle genius, El Genio de la Botella, something like that, and the name. And it is amazing that you can find that in Amazon. He wrote a great history. This is part of the work that he do in one of his movies, and this is part of the synopsis. Yeah, synopsis. Yeah, synopsis. Synopsis is another thing related with the mind. Yeah. So you can find more things here. Okay. Gianni Asprilla is the other brilliant mind that is doing art here in Colombia. And she is making also use of some patterns patterns that are created with the nature of our territories, and at the same time, patterns that belongs to our food traditions and that kind of things. As you can see there, he is also amazing. More speculative photography. Andres Mauricio Mosquera, Wow Solo. He has been creating a different way of looking through the lens of the Black people in the territory. Because as you can see here, these pictures are very saturated, a lot of hue and saturation. You don't gonna believe me, but these pictures, the colors that you see in these pictures belongs to the clothes that the people were wearing in that time. People all the time in Quito is wearing a lot of colors. So he's using that colors for transmitting a different meaning for the reality, yeah? Because when you change the color of a photography, you are altering or changing also the perception of reality, yeah? So Mauricio is great doing this kind of job. We have another artist that is Sonia Delarge. Artist is like Sonia, and is a plastic artist. She is amazing. I have been watching his work, and I get surprised because of the mixing that she do between prosthetics and some raw lines, as you can see there. And I love her color palettes. She is also a DJ, so she plays on music in her free time. Has been making a lot of work, illustration for artists here in Colombia. Let's Play, Tower and Damper, all of them. And finally, it is me. Yeah. I'm a video game developer, and actually are working in some projects that, but you can see some of the immersive experience that I have been creating in the last years, like as it is an intersection between all our architecture. In the 2021, I did an exposition, a VR exposition in the Negro Fest. My purpose was to try to talk about the Palapithic architecture that we have in the Pacific. Because for some people, that is something like us. The meaning of the Palapithics are like us, that is poverty. The people is pure because the people live in that kind of infrastructure or that kind of buildings. But from the side of the Black people that live in the territory, the Palafitos are a creative response to the wild climate change that they live in the territory. So because of that, I try to expose this through VR and make the people feel more connected with the territory. One of the experiences in the territory was that some of the people that live the experience start to tell me, hey, I have a new dream. I want to live in a palafito in the Chocó. So that is the romantic part of the palafitics, and I made a presentation about it. And the other thing is that I have been doing some explorations in Quill for Oculus Quest, as you can see there in that video. Oh, I don't know, is there a way to keep playing the video? Okay. So the other experience is related more with esotericism and the indigenous people from Colombia and how to mix it to tell some histories, as you can see there. That concept art that I turned into one animation and VR experience is from Pablo Villafrade. He's a friend who actually knows a lot about indigenous symbols, and I take the decision to do some experience with that. So that's it, the actual panorama of the Afrofuturism here in Colombia. We have more people speaking about it related with the music, the t-shirt, and the name of the t-shirt, I forgot the name of the t-shirt actually. But we have more people like Steve Steele that is speaking about African literature and Caribbean literature in the university that speak about Afrofuturism. And the teacher Angel Perea, who is speaking about Afrofuturism in the music in Bogota all the time. So that is the actual panorama. We have been having some workshops each year in the same month of the year. So you're gonna continue seeing more expressions and more talks about Afrofuturism every year. So thank you for your attention, and that was my short intervention. Yeah.
How did your mother influence your artistic vision?
Oh, yeah, that is a great question. How my mother influenced my artistic vision. Yeah, my mother influenced my artistic vision since I was a child. And she and I draw a lot in the floor, all the time in the floor. So all the time we were drawing bodies, black bodies, and indigenous people in the floor, and flowers and environment. So all the time we were doing drawings together, and when I was a child. And when I started to work in my video games, she was always saying to me, hey, I love your 2D art skills. Continue doing 2D arts. But I reach a point where I say, okay, I need to jump into the 3D because that was something like as the evolution. But all the time I try to hear her. Yeah, listen to her. And all the things that I write, I always say to my mom, hey, what do you think about it? So she is a big influence all the time. And she usually draw with me some things. Yeah, that's it. And so finally, Reason? Okay.
¿Para dónde va el movimiento de la Colombia? ¿Cómo la desde
El panorama. ¿Qué está pensando? Bueno, para resumir, voy a contestar en español para ser más ágil. ¿Hacia dónde va el panorama del afrofuturismo en Colombia? Yo creo que se está tornando o se ha vuelto un tema que muchas personas quieren explorar, como pudimos ver ahí desde la fotografía, desde las artes plásticas, desde la música, desde el desarrollo de videojuegos, incluso desde la forma como hacemos ciencia también se está influenciando en el afrofuturismo. Yo considero que va a haber una corriente de pensadores también y académicos, porque es otra cosa que nos hace mucha falta en la rama del afrofuturismo, porque quizás algunas veces lo vemos como que no es transversal al afrocentrismo y a las otras disciplinas que existen o las epístemes que existen dentro de la cosmogonía afro. Entonces yo pienso que muchos ya se están dando cuenta que esto es transversal, que en realidad implica una nueva forma de pensar, que en realidad implica romper ciertos paradigmas y se están montando en el tren en cada una de estas disciplinas que te acabo de mencionar. Siento que el cine va a ser clave para que esto se expanda un poco más, que muchos de los que estamos hoy aquí y otros que están por fuera están tomando la decisión ya de iniciar a vender sus obras y siento que va a ser clave para la dinamización también de la economía de la gente afro en el territorio colombiano. Esa es como la visión que tengo por ahora del afrofuturismo en Colombia. ¿Listo? Entonces, no siendo más, quiero agradecerlos por haber hecho parte como de este evento. Vamos a proceder con la proyección de la película de Reynaldo Velázquez. ¿Qué me dice? ¿Lonnie? Vamos a proceder entonces con Lonnie. Ok. Vamos a proceder con Lonnie Brooks. Quiero darle gracias a toda la audiencia que estuvo presente a través de Zoom con nosotros, que nos acompañó, que hizo parte del evento. El evento continúa en el espacio, así que muchas gracias por todo y continuaremos haciendo muchos más eventos. Están invitados mañana también al Negro Fest, que se va a celebrar en la Bodega con Fama en el Perpetuo Socorro. Muchas gracias a todos los patrocinadores, a la Universidad de Antioquia por este espacio, a Steve, a Bisam y a cada uno de los speakers que nos han acompañado. Vamos a continuar con Lonnie entonces en tarima y gracias a los que están a través de Zoom.